Merry Christmas, right? We're into December, we're in the Christmas spirit, and we have our natural infrastructure and growth scrutiny panel. Before we start, some housekeeping matters. We have no planned fire alarm, but if we do hear the fire alarm, please follow the signs to the nearest fire exit and meet at the fire assembly point in the Civic Square. Usual sort of procedures: when you're speaking, turn your microphone on. When you're not, turn it off. Mobile phones, usual courtesies apply. Turn it off, put it on silent. The meeting will be broadcast live on YouTube and can be watched over and over again, as I'm sure you're aware. And we're consenting to being filmed. Hannah, any apologies for today's meeting?
Through you, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Kevin Sproston. Councillors Allen and McCarthy are on the way, and a colleague is calling Councillor Darcy as we speak.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Cool. Are members happy to confirm the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you. If that can be noted. Chair's urgent business. I don't have any at this time. So, we're all about pillars on this particular scrutiny panel. So we're on to pillar 3, sustainable growth. If Councillor Briers-Delph can take us away, that'll be great. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you all for having us here today. Is it worth us starting off with some introductions? Conscious there's a few of us here. Amanda, do you want to just start off introducing yourself?
I'll take this one. Hello.
Takes a little while to...
Hello, I'm Amanda Razzi. I'm Head of Economy for Plymouth City Council. Thank you.
I'm Richard Stevens. I'm the Managing Director of Plymouth City Bus and also the sponsor or the lead for on the growth board for this pillar.
Hi, I'm Lauren Payton. I'm one of the Economic Development Officers at Plymouth City Council. I do a lot of the economic stats and I've been working with Mike at the strategy.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mike Page. I'm a Growth Board and Funding Manager. I work as part of Amanda's team involved with the economic strategy and the delivery plan.
Thank you, Tom. Good idea that everyone got introduced there. Thank you.
Sure. So first of all, we missed David. Everyone knows who you are, David. It's fine. So just wanted to begin by just doing an overview of why this pillar is so important and quite unusual as well. So there have been various efforts over recent years to make sure that the environment and sustainability more widely is at the heart of what not just this council does, but what businesses do, what community groups are passionate about, and how that is all connected. And there have been obvious instances of that, like the climate impact assessment, which is all about making sure that every key decision is evaluated against 8 different environmental factors. I believe this scrutiny committee or another scrutiny committee recently heard a presentation on the new brand strategy, which has nature right at its heart as well. And also with this particular example, this is about making sure that nature isn't something which is separate from what the business community are doing, but is at its heart, one of 4 key pillars alongside things that you've already had presentations on. So I believe you've already heard from productive growth and high-value jobs as well as inclusive growth. So today is the third of those 4 pillars for you to get a sense of what is happening in that space. I wanted to mention what sustainable growth refers to, because I think that word sustainability is something different people can read into. Generally, what we mean by that is about growth which doesn't negatively impact the environment, that promotes social inclusion and well-being and helps to drive what some people refer to as a green industrial economic revolution. We all know that Plymouth has huge strengths in blue sectors in particular. The city has really strong businesses with that sector, many of which are at the forefront of what we do economically. But I'm also interested, and one of the things we keep coming back to is that wider sense of sustainability as well, from decarbonisation to how to increase green and blue skills as a city, boosting nature recovery, reducing waste, and all those different strands which come back to sustainability in the widest possible sense. So this is a document with a very, very clear economic basis, and I always have to keep coming back to that, but it's a focus that does not come at the cost of damage to the environment. So we've already had some inductions today, and the reason why I want to start with that is that this has very much been a huge team effort, both internally and externally to the council. So it's been working alongside the Plymouth Growth Board leadership team, which is why I'm sitting next to Richard Stevens today. Richard briefly touched upon his role in this, but lots of you will know him as Managing Director of City Bus, but does so much for the city, from National Marine Park to Mountbatten to City College, I believe. I'm not sure quite how you find the time to do it all, Richard. And so he's been crucial to the progression of this particular pillar. We've also got Amanda here, who's been the PCC lead for sustainable growth, and she's been working very closely with officers from specific departments linked to sustainability. So from Kat Deeney, who you'll know from the natural infrastructure side of it, to John Green in the net zero team. So we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the practical steps that we're taking, but I want to start with a quick reflection on the criteria which we have on the slide at the moment, referring to exactly what we mean by this. So investment in green jobs, which is so central to our corporate plan, with a particular view to marine, helping businesses to adapt to climate change, with a practical focus on making sustainable adaptations. And that's something we'll be talking a huge amount in the years to come, of everything from drought to flooding. Decarbonisation, I've already mentioned, and there's some really great opportunities, particularly with some of Plymouth's construction firms. Building Plymouth have really been at the forefront of that there. Restoring our natural environment. Some of you will have heard me in full council talk about our recent designation as the second nature city in the country, and there's been various examples of how we've been working with partners to do that, including, of course, things like the National Marine Park and the Plymouth and South Devon Community Forest. Sustainable living, thinking very specifically there as well about clean transport, which has been a critical part of the work, and around some of the wider economic work happening with Team Plymouth and the exciting opportunities at Devonport. And then finally, skills. Not just skills for young people, although that's crucially important, but also thinking about career movers. How do you take the previous generations, plumbers and engineers, and transition them to the clean technologies of the future? So as I said earlier, we are all about ensuring that we deliver growth as a council. That's essential to our future, but we need to make sure that we guard against growth that causes damage to our incredible natural and local environment. So I'm now going to hand over to Richard and then to Amanda, who's going to talk about a few examples of key projects which we're just presenting today as case studies for the wider work we're doing. So over to you, Richard, to focus on electric buses.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, councillors. So Plymouth City Bus, yes, we were successful in a partnership with Plymouth City Council and Cornwall Council in securing money from the government's Zebra 2 fund. We're the first company to actually roll out their buses from that Zebra 2 funding, and we also had the largest award from the fund. So, you know, that's testament to the joint working of the two councils and the company. And for my company, you know, to put 20 million in is a significant investment and commitment to moving this forward. Hopefully you've seen them. They're out there. They're operating. They're getting you know, rave reviews. The technology is it's really smart. These buses are really clever, and we're learning how to manage them. I spend my life now thinking about battery management, and really interesting. The cold weather that we had just recently reduced their range by about 20%, which meant that by tea time we had to bring 17 of them back in to be recharged. Now, we're getting to grips with that. We're learning, and you know, others have paved the way. But I think, you know, it's fair to say that Plymouth now is at the leading edge of the decarbonisation of public transport. What I would highlight is that for the passengers, they're quieter, they're new, they're clean, they're a lovely bus, and they say so. But they're still stuck in the same traffic, and there are no more seats. So although they cost twice the money of a diesel bus, they don't actually have twice the advantages for the customer. They're not half the price, and they're not twice as frequent. You know, so I think as a community, as a city, we've a long way to go yet in moving forward our sustainable transport. But this is a massive step forward, and I think we've placed ourselves well. The facility up at my house now, which you're welcome to come and visit, is now, we've secured it intergenerationally now as a net zero depot. And, you know, we are in a position where we could decarbonise the rest of the bus fleet, assuming we could secure the investment. So, yeah, I think we should be pretty proud of ourselves as a city. Thanks, Tom.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Amanda, do you want to touch upon floating offshore wind?
Thank you. I think I'm probably going to bounce around a little bit broader than just floating offshore wind, because it's the technology applications which is the interesting part of that. So just for those of you that don't know, there is something called the Celtic Array, which is, if you imagine sort of between Cornwall, the Isles of Scilly and Wales and Ireland, it's in that area. It's a Crown Estates development, and they've let three contracts. Now, in terms of port infrastructure, that's really, really important. Is looking to drive, they're talking about up to sort of 7,000 more jobs in the southwest. Interestingly, those jobs align alongside our defence investment as well, and it's very similar skill sets. In terms of port infrastructure, that is going to there's going to be a lot of competition in terms of the port infrastructure, but it's driving clean jobs in that clean sector. In terms of the port infrastructure, the mapping is showing there's more than enough work for everybody. It's going to use the port infrastructure in Wales, all of Devon and Cornwall, and potentially France as well. So it's really important that we are very clear about where we focus on terms of those new clean jobs relating to port infrastructure and relating to floating offshore wind, because we don't have a lot of space. What we have got is this focus on trying to make sure that we focus on those high value jobs. So we've been quite specific in terms of where we are fishing for those jobs. We have been quite clear that we're looking at marine autonomy, and that is for surveying and hydrography, and actually ongoing protection of those anchoring systems. We're looking at cybersecurity. That goes back to the technology that links back to the university. We're looking at training, and we're also looking at sort of vitaling, which is getting people out and back again, because we're actually one of the ports that's got a connection to the mainline train stations as well. So we are being very specific in terms of where we're focusing those high value jobs in the sustainable sector, and looking at what the needs are for the city. And that's quite an interesting thing to sort of align along with all the other competitions in the city. So there's a sort of a link in terms of that links up to waterfront space, and how we use our space with the competition, but links to housing as well. But we're very, very focused in terms of what that means. When you come and looking at, again, port infrastructure and green jobs, I've got to put a shout out for some of the work that we've just done with ABP. So ABP have just installed shore power. That's really important, because that shore power has been a 5 million investment that we've drawn down from LUF funding, with 1.3 million from Freeport money, and over £17 million from ABP itself. So there's some substantial investment that's gone in that means that our port at Mill Bay will have shore power, and that will be operating, and that protects the investment and the ongoing connectivity through Brittany ferries, which gives us connectivity to northern France and actually northern Spain as well. And you can't underplay that. That's our international element. So just sort of going back to the importance of marine autonomy, I touched on that earlier. We were announced as the National Centre for Marine Autonomy this summer. That's a really important badge. That's bringing, and the reason why that's important, those are the businesses that are right at the cutting edge of not just autonomous applications, but clean propulsion. So if you look at some of the businesses that we have got in the city, I can give particularly based over at Turnchapel. You've got Aqua, which piloted and actually was one of the few businesses that got MCA accreditation around a hydrogen propulsion system. They've taken that out now, but they proved that it worked. It was a proof of concept project. We have got Zero and some of the work that is also being done with Ocean. Zero have got a hybrid battery storage system. It's interesting hearing what Richard was saying because there's the same issues there. Colder, they don't last as long, but you know, how do you put in a hybrid system? Very important in terms of maybe dual use applications because a battery system is quiet and therefore you can't hear it if you're looking for submarines, but also really important if you want to look at you're in sensitive landscapes or seascapes in terms of not having any diesel operated propulsion systems. And then you've got Ocean, which is looking at using a sail drive system. So really interesting in terms of you've got a whole mixture of stuff that is going on in terms of those applications. And I am jumping around a little bit, but I touched on hydrogen. The Freeport, which isn't in our geography at the moment, but we have very strong links in terms of how that works, in terms of inward investment. It's a very important tool for us, has got a hydrogen power system that they're looking to develop up there. And what they're particularly looking for is the market for it. So it's not producing the hydrogen, but how do we join up with the market? So some really interesting things that are coming out in terms of what, the sustainable pillar, but it's around the growth and how do you reduce costs, how do you reduce carbon, but also where these high growth jobs are coming and emerging. So it's a really important element, and I don't think we play enough on how we're right at that cutting edge. So that's just a little bit in terms of, I've jumped around a little bit. I've probably wrecked any presentation around ports, which is on for our next scrutiny panel, because I've covered quite a lot of that. But it's really important. That's where we've got some real cutting edge. So just moving on to the next steps. So as a pillar, we are now meeting. We've got quarterly meetings in. This is probably a pillar where it still needs some more work in terms of the evidence base, and I think we'll be looking at commissioning some more work around there in terms of whether there are opportunities that are emerging. And if you look at what's in our work stream, we've got some gaps, which I think we've been very open about, but it's not gaps where there aren't opportunities. We've got lots of opportunities, and I'll give the example of the bus as an opportunity, how that's changing, how those jobs are emerging. Battery technology is the one that springs to mind, and therefore I would say that is a gap that we are doing it, but we haven't put it front and centre of our actual strategies. There's a little bit of work in terms of how we develop the strategies it moves forward. We've done the first round of monitoring. Now, that's really important in terms of how you look at the economic strategy. We've talked about the pillars, but then you can write something down, but unless we're actually moving it forward and monitoring and checking what's actually happening, we're actually doing that, and we've been working jointly across the partnership, and we've introduced AI into our monitoring. It's now powered by Power BI, which is able to pull all that information together. In our first round of monitoring, we had 75% response rate, which means we've still got some work to do on that. But it's, for the first round, that's good. That's good news that we're moving that forward. And we are not just looking at the primary pillars, we're looking at how projects contribute to secondary pillars. So a little bit like I was just talking about earlier, this is high. Some of these are high value. Some of these might fall into the high value jobs, but it also falls into sustainable development. And we may have instances where they meet all three of the pillars, or four of the pillars, and skills as well. So that's an important element. We're looking at that, and then we're looking at we've sort of I touched on how we were sort of reviewing the list. The original list was for 3 years. But I think on this bit, we are picking up more activity. And if you've got questions around that, there's something that we're all looking at. And it's part of the reason why Mike and Lauren are both here, because we're looking at that evidence base to make sure that we are capturing everything. And then, just going back to the partly or fully address, the issue with this is the pace of innovation and change is pretty rapid. So I touched on marine autonomy. We are right at the cutting edge of that. We're right at the cutting edge of some of these alternative propulsions. We've got some really cool businesses that are doing some really cutting edge stuff. And I don't think I'd be talking out of turn here. Businesses like Recycle It Global, who are headquartered in the city. Businesses like Artilium, right at the cutting edge. And that pace is moving very quickly, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the pace that we put together an economic strategy, review it, make sure it's evidence-based. But we have got, and we should be really proud about, we've got some very cool stuff that is happening. So I hope that helps. We've got sort of 15, 20 minutes for questions. So I hope that gives you sort of a bit of an overview. And if anyone's got any questions, we welcome them.
Thank you. That's great. Lauren.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, but I'll start with this one. I'm really excited to hear that the integration, also I love your enthusiasm, Amanda, about this pillar, it's amazing. I'm really excited to hear that the electric buses are kind of bedding into the city well, service users are enjoying them. I was, when I heard the cost is double that of a diesel bus, I just wanted to pick up on that. Is that initial outset of cost, or is that in the full bus lifetime?
That's a great question. I mean, the answer is it's the initial purchase is twice the price. So it's about £286,000 to buy a fully compliant Euro 6 diesel bus, and it's just shy of £500,000 to buy an electric bus. In terms of the whole life cost, that then goes up because you have to replace the battery packs as you go, and experience tells us that's between 3 and 5 years. More 3 than 5, and at 30 grand a pop, you're adding another £150,000 in the lifetime cost for batteries for that vehicle. The running costs are less, so there are less moving parts on an electric bus. I'm told, I don't know that this is fact, but I'm told there's 10,000 less parts on an electric vehicle than on a diesel vehicle, because there's a lot less components than in a diesel engine, and so wear and tear is a lot less. Maintenance cycles, all the safety elements are still absolutely the same, mirror, because it's still a vehicle on the road. But in terms of oils, so one of the areas we save money is that you don't have the same use of oil as you would in a diesel engine. So that's really positive. And actually the cost differential between diesel and electric has been improving, because for a while there, a diesel mile and an electric mile was the same cost. But as energy prices have come down a bit, there is a bit of a bounty, if you like, on that. So we're anticipating that the whole life running costs will be lower than a diesel vehicle, but we're still a long way off proving whether the whole life costs are lower. Well, in fact, they won't be. I mean, there's a long way to go on a point where there'll be a commercial business case for an electric vehicle without some form of public intervention. We're quite a long way off that yet.
Jack, can I add to that? This is a point which there has been some misunderstanding on by local journalists and some politicians in the past, and it wasn't what your question was getting at, but I think it's really important to use this opportunity to reiterate as well. So there has been some coverage to imply that the over £30 million was council investment to buy those 50 vehicles, but I just wanted to state really clearly that that wasn't the case. So the Plymouth City Council's contribution was 750 grand of community infrastructure levy money, so money that comes from private developers, and that was directed to make this a viable partnership project, to cover the cost of some of the infrastructure around it, and to unlock that over £30 million of external investment, both from a private point of view, from Citybus, but also in terms of the national government investment as well. So whilst the upfront cost of the buses was expensive, it was actually a very small PCC-related contribution that helped to unlock that in the first place. And as a council, we're very proud to have played our part in that. And we see it as an essential project for air quality, for newer modern buses, and for various other aspects.
Supplementary to that, Chair, and thank you, Tom, for that clarification as well. I think it's really important. You mentioned one of the benefits to this electric fleet being improvements to air quality, and I was wondering what monitoring we're doing, particularly around those depots, to kind of monitor the improvements since those buses have been in place.
That's a really good question. So Plymouth City Council, quite a few years ago now, announced what's called an air quality monitoring area, an AQMA. And essentially that was because as a city, we were above nitrous oxide levels beyond what was nationally recommended. So it meant that we were required, and this is over a decade ago now, to start monitoring those particulates at various locations. And it's quite interesting actually that some of the areas that were particularly high were ones which were on busy transport routes. So there's ones which won't be a surprise to you: Royal Parade, Mutley Plain, but also Devonport Road in Stoke, particularly the junction there with Marhouse Road. And so these are all areas that have huge amounts of car travel, but also those major then diesel buses using those routes regularly. The positive news is that we've shown as a city sustained improvement on that over multiple years, to the point which last year we revoked the AQMA because we're consistently below those thresholds. So that isn't solely as a response to this transition, but it does show that the city as a whole has improved on air quality over the last decade. But we are working on an air quality strategy, and there is published data around air quality which goes through DEFRA and the Environment Agency.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on the city bus situation. So are all 50 electric buses going to be rolled out this year, Richard?
Yeah, great question. So 50 buses are live today. In fact, we've just announced or I've just given a press quote to that effect to sort of celebrate that milestone that all 50 are here. And then we've another 9 because of the partnership working. We managed to secure a little bit of extra funding from the DFT. So we've got another 9 which will be in service by April, which will bring the total up to 59.
And just out of curiosity, have any of obviously with the charging element, thanks for being so open about what you're doing, have any buses just had to stop because they haven't managed to get to the charging point yet?
No, we've not been in that scenario. So the way the battery management works is that there is a lower limit, which is 10%. So 10% of the current range that we're getting, which is averaging around 210 miles, unless it's exceptionally cold, means we've got 21 miles to play with. So yeah, it could happen, but it hasn't happened. And I mean, we're successfully running buses across to the Rain Peninsula, across the Tor Point Ferry. That's the first electric vehicles to ever operate on a ferry. Go Plymouth. Although we're at the forefront of this in a regional setting, London has been paving the way in sort of battery technology and battery management. So we're pretty confident that won't be an issue to us.
And do the electric buses, do they carry petrol or diesel just in case?
Again, a good question, but no, there is no supplementary power. It is all battery technology. They take about 7 hours to get to a full charge, but you can get to 80% in 40 minutes. So, you know, incidental charging is just part of new life when it comes to scheduling buses. But no, I mean, they're literally moving under their own steam. And if you drive on, and I have, the acceleration and deceleration on them is really effective and efficient. I mean, they're a good driver's vehicle. The drivers really like them. And I think from a customer perspective, the other thing they're at the leading edge of is that they have 2 wheelchair spaces. So for the first time in the city, we can actually safely carry 2 wheelchairs at the same time on each of these double-decker buses, which is a massive step forward in sort of vehicle technology. I mean, it's not good enough, but it is a significant step from only having 1 wheelchair capacity. So that's another benefit that people aren't really talking about, and that's partly because the layout, because of there's less under the floor, for want of a better expression, means that you can utilise the space in the saloon in a different way. So that's pretty cool.
One of the questions was the infrastructure of all this, because it feels quite radical. 50 buses. How are you finding the infrastructure of all that, keeping them going? How are you finding that?
To be honest, that's an area of the project that's gone the smoothest, to tell you the truth. Once we secured the connectivity, the reason we went first was because there was an available capacity adjacent to the depot, and so the infrastructure's gone really smoothly and very reliably. So the infrastructure works are there, and we could actually charge twice the number of buses out of the infrastructure that we've already got. So we've future-proofed ourselves. That's not to say that we wouldn't add some more charging capacity. What we're looking to now is how could we provide that as a facility to other organisations as an off-take when we're not charging on it? Because if you're up there now, there's probably 2 buses on charge at the moment. So, you know, we're looking to see how we can sort of fit into that ecosystem of heavy vehicle charging to see if that, you know, if that is a viable proposition.
Just my final point, Tom. I know you got into the figures. There was, and there will be, questions about public money going into private bus companies. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just debate. So it's all on record. The figures are there. I'm not quite sure why you went into that. They were legitimate questions. We all see the pros and cons, but, and it's all open and transparent. So yeah, I was one of those people that was questioning if a council should be putting public money into a private bus company, and that's everyone's right to raise issues when they occur at the time.
No point did I say that the questions weren't legitimate, but it is accurate to say that there were misunderstandings that were raised publicly by both councillors and journalists. So I was using this opportunity to make sure people realised the source of that money and the extent to which PCC contributed to it.
Which is the community infrastructure, which is public money held by Plymouth City Council to spend on whatever it wants. In this instance, that these are political choices. We've chosen to support City Bus with public money. That's fair enough. But these are decisions that get made. Okay. Councillor Smith, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. My question is kind of, I guess, about how we communicate about the offshore wind stuff, because a lot of the stuff I hear about the companies like Turnchapel and places like that seems to link mainly to defence investment, defence spending, less so on offshore wind. So I wonder, how are we communicating that to businesses that we may want to attract here? Because I think we hear about that less. And also in terms of investment that's going to be coming to the city from offshore wind stuff, is there a lot in the pipeline like we have with defence stuff, which we hear about until, you know, we had Helsing open recently and there's more stuff to come? Have we got similar in the pipeline with offshore wind?
That's a really good it's a really good question. I think the important bit here is it's dual use applications, and we have done both. So this summer we also ran quite a large conference at about 118, 120 businesses, and we also had the Crown Estates and some of the people that have won some of those contracts, EDF as an example, and we had them in the city and we were promoting the opportunities. So we have been doing that, but this is early on some of the floating offshore wind opportunities. So the floating offshore wind opportunities probably aren't going to come on board with, they're talking about sort of an 8 to 10 year lead time. So we're at the beginning of that phase. Meanwhile, the defence stuff is here and now. So I think that's why you're hearing that different, the different levels of noise, but it's not, noise is not the right word, different levels of enthusiasm and opportunity. But there is definitely opportunity. And the figure that I heard was if you looked at the application for autonomy in hydrography surveying, if you could apply autonomy in it, it speeds up the consenting period by up to 2 years, because you can run it 24 hours a day. You're not having to put people out in conditions which are really unpleasant, rough. You know, if you get seasick, you won't want to be out there. But if you're just sending, in effect, machines out to do the work, you can speed that up, and you can work in a different way. So there's definite interest. There's still some issues around consenting. So that's some consenting, as in making sure that you've got the right regulatory framework. Actually, in this instance, because the MOD can see that they need private sector investment as well as MOD investment, they're really keen to join forces around that dual use, because it speeds up the application which MOD are looking for, which is innovation at pace. So they're both working with the same level of energy and activity, but they are working on different time frames.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. That's the kind of clarification I wanted, because I think I've heard it mentioned lots of times, but seen less stuff. So, but it's fair to say that it's just a bit further back along the line than defence stuff. That's great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, one of which actually builds off of Councillor Smith's point. This committee has been sort of led to believe over the last few sessions that Team Plymouth, Growth Alliance Plymouth, is the main economic game in town. To what extent would you describe the focus of Team Plymouth as sustainable growth?
So I've talked about autonomy, and you know, if you take Team Plymouth, first of all, the economic strategy has got 55 projects in it which are live, of which 22 fall under the banner of Team Plymouth. So to be very clear, and we have always been very clear, Team Plymouth sits underneath the economic strategy. It's part of it, but it doesn't deliver all of the things that we need to do in the economic strategy, and we need to have an economy which isn't just defence related and focused. And Team Plymouth isn't just defence related and focused, but very clearly we need to look at across our whole economy. So I hope that sort of first of all clarifies that it's not just about Team Plymouth. Team Plymouth is part of the argument, but if you just looked at those numbers, 22 out of 55, it's about half. But that means it's half of things that could be counted, it's not all solely defence.
And just to add to that, I think it's a really important question, and I think the work that Team Plymouth is doing is incredibly important and makes massive sense with the several £billion pipeline. It would be wrong not to make sure that our city was benefiting from that level of investment. But one of the many other projects in the economic strategy, for instance, the Heat Network. So the Heat Network is over £400 million green investment opportunity for this city over the next generation. It's one that would not have been possible without the enthusiasm and leadership of the council. And it's one which we are one of the first places across the country out to procurement to become one of the first heat network zones. It will deliver hundreds of green jobs for the city, and it also has the opportunity to really boost small businesses that will be part of the procurement and the pipeline around that as well. And so that sits completely outside that wider Team Plymouth remit, but it's an example of one of the many ways in which the sustainable growth is coming to life in other areas.
Yeah, I mean, just putting my chair of growth board hat, I think it's really important that you know, Team Plymouth is an opportunity to accelerate areas of our economy within the city that would have likely got there in you know, in time, but Team Plymouth is putting a real focus on it and an energy and investment that we wouldn't have otherwise had. But our overall economy is a really broad church, but also so are our challenges. And so anything that we can lever is a good thing from my perspective. But no, you should be reassured that Team Plymouth is not the only game in town. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a somewhat provocative question on purpose, but thank you. I'm going to ask my other sort of standard question that I do at these sessions, which is, and Amanda's going to hate me for this, but around the kind, how do we, you know, you've got some stuff about it's now meeting on a quarterly basis. The first round of monitoring is complete. You know, this plan was launched in February 24, of which the Sustainable Growth Pillar was an element. Got the first round of monitoring. Nearly 2 years in, how do we know if the sustainable growth elements laid out in that initial plan are succeeding? This is a 10-year plan. We're nearly 20% of the way through. How are we measuring ourselves? And as a aside to that, how are we assuring, you know, we talk a lot about blue-green jobs. Some of those are going to be hard marine autonomy, which probably aren't sustainable growth for the broader defence. So how are we breaking apart, and maybe this is more of a stats and numbers issue, but how are we measuring ourselves and how are we measuring sustainable growth? You know, how's that recorded? How can we go and dig into that more?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because obviously defining green jobs can be quite difficult. One thing that is happening is that the UK Office of National Statistics has kind of defined green jobs in a way that we can use, and I did write some stuff in the document, in the report for you, but just to go over it again very briefly. In 2023, 46% of UK full-time jobs were green jobs, and that's a standardised kind of category. They go into the SIT codes, which is each job would have assigned to a different industry, and they pick out what they deem as green jobs. So we can go based off that, and if we look at that, Plymouth is doing really well with the lowest emitting industries at 45% of full-time employees, which is obviously really good for the city. Beyond that, I think maybe Amanda, you want to pick up on that?
Mike, do you want to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, so just to touch on the monitoring itself, and I don't want to, you know, give an impression that we've got all these amazing metrics around it. That's not something we have. The actual monitoring itself is on the progress, not necessarily on the impact. But the one thing that we are doing, I think, is looking really closely at the data, and this, as we develop the pillar, it will be much more focused around what is the data telling us. Are we showing that progress? The other thing I was going to say is this is one of 4 pillars and skills. What we have actually also around that are a set of 12 long-term aspirations for the economic strategy. And I think with those aspirations, we're doing an annual review to look at the overall progress that we're making as part of the economic strategy.
So just to sort of summarise that, we're looking at the Office of National Statistics. That's a national benchmark, so we're not making the numbers up. It's something that means we can compare and contrast how we're achieving at a national level. We touched on the economic strategy. Actually, the projects were every 3 years, not every 10 years. So we've got this review that's going to come in about 12 months. So we'll have another look at that to make sure, you know, we are doing what we said we'd set out to do, but going back to the evidence base to make sure that we're doing that. And as I think we have sort of touched on, the pace is changing. Things like the heat network, what was included, the buses weren't included as an example. So we need to have another look at this because the pace is changing. We probably miss some opportunities. And I don't know, Richard, if you want to sort of add to that as being you're our cheerleader and our leader in this, along with Tom.
Heck, follow that.
Right, Amanda.
Oh, sorry. So for me, sort of wrapping my head around sustainable growth and sustainable jobs has actually been quite a challenge, I'm not going to lie. And the reality is you could have a job that wouldn't be classed as sustainable, but it needs to be in a business that is sustainable. So part of our remit is how do we help businesses do business in a sustainable way? How do we help residents live in a sustainable way, even though their activity might not be classed as sustainable? So I think the monitoring piece is really, really important. But what's hard to grip hold of for me, is that this pillar in particular is more focused on how we do things and not necessarily just nuts and bolts of, well, if we do it like this, you know, I think the buses are in irony are a sort of a one example of what you could say is sustainable growth, but it's only sustainable if the environment that those buses are actually operating in the city, if that all fits in around it, then we really will have sustainable transport. But in isolation, just buying electric buses doesn't create sustainable transport. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess all those bus drivers are now sustainable, or maybe they were before. 45% of the entire workforce being a green job seems quite high, and actually maybe for the sort of intent of this strategy, we need to look at our, what's the threshold here to truly qualify in line with the 6 objectives you had at the start. That's probably enough from me, so I'll pass on. Thank you.
Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the heat map on page 20, which sort of flags that Plymouth has a very high energy productivity level, which is good, and we're in a positive path towards sustainable economic growth, and we've heard a lot about that today. Actually very ambitious, which is good. Can I ask what projections have been looked at or will be looked at in relation to the proposed growth in the city centre of 10,000 homes? Because some of the businesses coming in to deliver that may not be fully sustainable, and I just wonder whether that's something you're looking at.
Yes, I think there are a few ways in which you can link sustainability to that topic. So we know as a city that we have huge housing targets to meet, and there are various sustainability benefits to concentrating intensification of that housing growth in the city centre. So one example of that is around it takes the pressure off suburban green spaces because you're able to deliver at scale 10,000 in existing brownfield sites. So it's a great opportunity for people who want to retain as many green spaces as possible. But there are the more nuanced ways to thinking about it as well. So from a decarbonisation point of view, the fact that we will have more people living in the city centre where they have the majority of our city's bus routes on their doorstep, where they have a huge number of barrel bike stands on their doorstep, where they'll have businesses within walking distance from shops and retail opportunities to their sources of employment, will mean that the need for car ownership will be different to if they lived further out from the city centre, which isn't to say that there won't be people who want to own or rent their own cars. I'm not saying that, but the pressure to do so will be different, and that's a good thing from a sustainability point of view. Another aspect which is really fundamental to the planning around the city centre housing is that heat network connectivity is ready to go with that. So the new version of Armada Way has been designed to have heat network connectivity as part of it. That's already there in the Mill Bay development as well. So as we start to work on the first cluster of the heat network, which is based around the city centre, those new properties will be ready to plug straight into the most affordable low carbon heating solution possible in the city, which is the heat network. So rather than that heat going out into the sound from South West Water, that being redirected to homes, so those residents and businesses in the city centre benefit. But no, you're completely right as well, that as businesses change in the city centre too, that this is an opportunity for us to continue to encourage those to go in that sustainable way. And that will definitely be at the heart of the work that various departments do as they're planning that city centre growth.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Chair. Hannah, if you could note my existing interest in Ocean OS, because we track maritime emissions with satellites and use artificial intelligence to interpret it. So I won't comment on air quality. really interesting presentation. The work with the buses is fantastic. Amanda, I can totally appreciate why you jumped around through so many different things there. I guess I've got a couple of questions. One was, with the defence spending coming, can you contextualise the spillover into this commercial space? Is that something you're able to do at this stage?
That's quite a challenging question. Yeah,
Josh, if you can turn your light off, mate.
honest answer, no, I don't think I can. But what I can say is if you look at Turnchapel, that is full. It was on the news. That's already full. We already know that there is talk of a sort of version 2. So you can see the pipeline of investment, and we can see that actually not all the businesses, some of the businesses, but not all the businesses that are coming around marine autonomy are defence-based. So I can give some examples, particularly Frugro and Ocean. They're definitely in the space of hydrography and surveying. Zero is dual use. They've only actually sold in and only exported so far around hydrography. They're all looking at defence, but they haven't actually gone there yet. So, but by the same token, you've got just defence businesses that are coming in, like Helsing, like Thales. So you can see that they're all in that melting pot. And I don't know if you've been down to Turnchapel, but it's quite an interesting place to walk around. You see people wearing life jackets alongside people with like multiple computers, alongside somebody that's wearing one of those sort of belts that's got lots of tools in it, and they're all fixing things. And that's the interesting bit. That's what that pace and of what's sort of happening down there is really, really interesting. And the types of businesses that have come in. I don't think also it's also in the public domain. We've got Fisher Group have been in. They've been out with a bit of kit that, this isn't a technical term, but it looks remarkably like the type of thing that you had on Thunderbirds, where it goes under the water and comes up again. There's obviously defence applications for that, but that is primarily a hydrography and monitoring business. So it is a really interesting. I don't know what's going to happen there. It's all happening very quickly. The value of marine autonomy has been projected to be £103 billion globally. And we are one of 3 places in the world that is at that level of cutting edge.
Just keep the flow. I like the flow.
Right, quick,
Just saying, not being the clock watcher that I am, just as a general thing, because things can get out of control. Just if we just look at the speed of questions and answers, that'd be great. Thank you.
So very quick question then in that sense. So that's really interesting and good to hear, reassuring to hear. I guess, and Tom particularly spoke to that piece around sort of, seeing new business in the city centre and things like that. And my take on it would be, if we're seeing these businesses and these industries coming into Plymouth, the byproduct of that is we're going to bring with them the people that live these green and blue values. And to me, that's a way of escalating behaviour change. Do you think that's going to be a real thing?
Yes, I think that's certainly the case, and I mentioned in the introduction as well about the brand strategy as well, because with the emphasis on attracting these high value jobs to the city, we need to think about what is our offer to them around sustainability. So not just around the amazing natural space we live, cushioned between the National Marine Park and Dartmoor, but also around being a council and a city and a business network that is passionate about the environment in such a way that will attract people with those values and with that education background that we want. And then I think you're right, with that you get opportunities for individuals and for new networks and for connections that will help a wider behaviour change strategy as well. Richard, do you want to answer?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, one of my hats, I'm also the chair of the Plymouth Chamber of Commerce and the Plymouth Area Business Council. And one thing I can tell you is that the businesses are literally clamouring to work out how do they provide service, sell products to these defence companies and organisations. And I think, the analogy I'd use is that at the moment we've got a lot of round pin plugs and square pin sockets, And I think one of the things that we're trying to do as a business community is to make sure that everybody's talking the same language so that people can see the solutions and the answers to problems on both sides of what is an emerging frontier, you know, because it's so new. And people, you know, it's helping them to educate and move on the fly, move quickly. But I mean, yeah, for me personally, the business community believes that there will be a roll-off, and particularly in this sustainable area.
David was itching to get in there.
I was just some practical examples. If you go back to, I mean, this is not the first time we've been through this kind of defence growth. It happened again in the 90s, but it was short-lived. So the reason we've got a density of manufacturing here, which is bled into the civilian space, is because of the nuclear legacy and the engineering from it. So two really simple examples. So 13% of manufacturing, which is civilian, not necessarily defence contractors. But take Barden and Fine Tubes, which are mainly civilian contractors. So Barden make ball bearings that can't fail, and Fine Tubes make tubes that can't fail. And that's because in nuclear engineering, you have to have things that cannot fail. But the application for that original technology that they were working in the defence space for nuclear submarines in the 70s and 80s and beyond is now for Barden is ball bearings in Formula One and helicopters. So helicopters can't fail, and Formula One cars can't fail. And for Fine Tubes, it's hydraulic pipes for aeroplanes that can't fail. So there's just a brilliant example of how that technology translates. Now, on the military stuff, to give you an example, and I can only give you, this is from a Radio 4 programme, but it will explain it because it explains it to me. So the old way of doing military applications were you'd have £100 million or so and go to a very big, very famous military supplier and say, build me a big bit of grey metal and do it over 5 years, test it 1 million times and rock up. Now what's happening is the military contractors are saying, we need a problem solved in 6 months and we need to market in 6 months. That application will become redundant maybe in 6 months and has to be repurposed on a platform in 6 months. And of course, if you're going to those massive military contractors, it's not the way they think, it's not the way they work. So suddenly they're going into the 3 or 4 business where there's 7 people, 5 amazing graduates, from all over the world, the best minds, mind the PhDs from the best universities like they're doing at Plessy. And they're taking that civilian pace and applying it into military problems. That's when talking about hybrid navy, that's what they're talking about. So the Navy are saying, we have to move faster, the world's changing, but we can't go to, I'm not mentioning the sort of these big companies that, would do it over, the level of assurance to get into the military supply chain, but it's all changing and that's the opportunity. So if you take, in 5-10 years time, we'll be talking about those companies that started in that space, but they'll be telling that technology into flow and into the modern way of living and into buses and into batteries, and that's the opportunity. So at the moment, as Amanda's articulating, it's hard to know quite where this is going to go, but you have to be at the front of it, you have to have the skills. And then going back to the city centre, you've got, and the point made, you're absolutely providing a product for some people who, as you said, are going to want those values of living, but also that's the sort of thing. But also you've got, going back to the green, you've got the embedded carbon of working with the grain of buildings rather than demolishing them and starting again. So and obviously transport. So it is, and go to Charlotte's question, it is hard to kind of exactly narrate where this graph is going to go, but we have to be at the front, otherwise others will adopt early and we'll miss our USP.
I think that's really interesting. I think the fact that you've started to integrate AI into your analysis and data is really important, because that is one of those pieces that is going to allow you to respond in the best time possible rather than missing opportunities. Yeah.
Sorry, and to release the private sector to do this. We are creating a platform for them to innovate. Local government isn't where this innovation is going to happen. It's at that cutting edge of academia, business, and military. And our job is the conditions. It's the petri dish to allow that to happen.
Councillor McClay.
Thank you, Chair. I want to pick up on that point that you just made, David, about creating the right conditions for growth. So for me, I think there's a project that really punches above its weight in each of the 4 economic strategy pillars, and also really draws in that skills element. And to me, that is retrofitting and home insulation. I think it's a huge missing component of the kind of list of projects that we have before us today. So a kind of 2-pronged question. One, how are we progressing in terms of retrofitting the council estate? And then two, we know that like a door-to-door home insulation program would bring in high-level jobs, it would bring in apprenticeships, it would make our homes less damp. You know, Plymouth has the dampest and mouldiest homes in the UK. Our housing estate is in desperate need of regeneration. It would also improve health outcomes. And I'm also conscious that the 3.1 billion energy obligation scheme has just been pulled by the government. So I am worried about the state of retrofit in general. What are we doing to make the case that that project is really central and really important for Plymouth?
No, I think you're right. Retrofit has so many opportunities, both economically, in terms of health, in terms of cost of living, reducing our energy bills. So the Net Zero team is involved with a whole range of programs that are linked to this. So both in terms of retrofitting our own estate, our corporate estate, our commercial estate, introducing fabric first heat retention approaches, introducing heat pumps so that we transition away from gas boilers, and that's been done on most of our major council buildings already. In terms of benefits for residents, we've been working alongside a range of national grant programs so that we have the funding to deliver on some of this for residents. So we're really prioritising making sure people most in need benefit from this. So we've delivered several £1 million worth of improvements through the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. So that's working with Plymouth Community Homes and with Live Well to help retrofit homes of people most in need of cutting their energy bills. More recently, we've announced, again, several millions of pounds of investment going into the Warm Homes local grant, which will help us to deliver retrofitting for homes. We work very closely with Plymouth Energy community in terms of offering energy support and advice, and that includes what you suggested about going door to door. So I've personally knocked on doors in Stoke Court, for instance, with Plymouth Energy community staff to try and increase the uptake of the Homes Upgrade 2 grant, which was about retrofitting homes which aren't on gas. There were very restrictive criteria under the previous government for that particular grant. PEC was struggling to get homes involved, and my suggestion was to email councillors in the wards that had the highest concentration of households that were eligible, and for us to join that door knocking effort to get homes to benefit from up to £20,000 per home of free government money that at that point Plymouth wasn't taking up. And I was really pleased in my own ward to help encourage some residents to do that. So there's a whole raft of approaches, and that's certainly essential to this particular programme too.
Okay, brilliant. Just the final one. On page 21, I don't know if I've missed something here, sorry. Overall, only one red rag rating element was reported, and this has been noted by the team, and the project will receive additional support where necessary. What is the project? It's a bit mysterious. I can't see. Have I missed something? It'd be nice to know what it is, and just if you could just have an explanation of it, please.
I don't have it in front of me, but I might need to go away and have a look at that. But it's regged in terms of its progress, so it could well be a reflection of it's not as a project. It's not started as such, so the monitoring picks it up in a particular way, and it produces an overall sort of reg rating. So yes, you are right. If you look at the actual monitoring itself, I said one of the projects is not performing the way, so we're now looking. We'll work with them to see how we can bring that forward. So it's
Mike, I've never seen
these
this.
are not
Mike,
carrots.
Mike, I've never seen this in a report where it doesn't actually say what it is.
Jack, can I suggest that we come back to you subsequently?
I think
situation,
I'll
but
come back to you.
we don't clearly know what it is.
Appreciate that, Chair. We'll address that.
Thank you. That's great. Charlotte, did you have a little sort of idea or a recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking, obviously in the report, we've got the current list of projects that are under your sustainable growth projects at the top of page 17. If you are reviewing the current list of projects per your next step slide and also doing that monitoring, it would be great to put a request in to officers to share with us that updated list and the sort of findings from that initial round of monitoring. I think that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Chair. Could we also see some updated stats on air quality monitoring as well?
Brilliant. If you can record that, Hannah, that would be great.
Recording those as actions, is that okay?
Yeah.
Rather than as a recommendation to bring something back, yeah?
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, thank you. That's been a great session. We obviously build around about the pillars. This was a really important pillar. As much as we have different views on how we're going to get there, ultimately we all want clean air. And Richard, particularly, thank you for what you're doing all around the city and everyone else that supported Tom and the team today. So thank you. Our next item is kind of coupled together, and it's the Plymouth Plan update and review. If you could get them, Hannah, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, brilliant. So we now move on to the Plymouth Plan update and review, which is well organised with the next steps element and timetable. So we should go through this succinctly, and we've got plenty of time to do this justice. So, Councillor Stevens, if you want to kick us off, introduce your team, and we'll go from there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today, as you know, for the Plymouth Plan and the local plan combination. We'll try to clarify what each of those plans means as we go along, and we'll value your contribution to it. I'll let the team introduce themselves, if that's okay, Chair, and you'll go along for this agenda item anyway.
Hello, Kat Deeney, Head of Environmental Planning.
Jonathan Bell, Head of Spatial Planning and Sustainable Development.
I'm Service Director, Strategic Planning and Infrastructure.
Okay. Well, I'll start off to give an overview of the purpose we're here. Members will be aware that since 2015, we have had a long-term strategic plan for Plymouth, owned not just by the City Council, but by city stakeholders and partners, and that's called the Plymouth Plan. Members who were serving on the council at the time, were there any here? One member serving on the council at the time?
What year?
2015.
I was here.
Well, yeah.
It's a very well-run council then, and still is, but it was particularly well-run there.
Yeah, and actually we've learned so much more. It's even better run now, which is fantastic. But members who were serving on that council, Councillor Ricketts, at the time may recollect the bold decisions we made back then to get rid of over 140 strategies and bring them together into this one single holistic plan. The Plymouth Plan is a pioneering approach to city policy, which has been recognised throughout regional, national, and even received international awards. It is genuinely strategic and holistic, covering the main policy areas with the purpose of setting a clear direction of travel for the city that all our partners and communities can get behind and help deliver. To keep the plan relevant and up to date, we have refreshed it on 3 occasions. Additionally, since the adoption of the Plymouth and South West Devon Joint Local Plan in March 2019, we were able to integrate Plymouth's planning policies into the Plymouth Plan, giving the Plymouth Plan a clear spatial expression. I won't talk about the local plan at this moment, as that's the next item on your agenda. All I would say here is that the Plymouth Plan is concerned with how the city functions as a whole, its social, economic and environmental well-being, which is much wider than the land use and spatial dimension covered by the local plan. The Plymouth Plan and the local plan are two separate but strongly connected plans. We might say that the local plan is the Plymouth Plan's spatial strategy. So now that it is more than 10 years old, we're here now with the Plymouth Plan today. Where are we? This is a question that we asked a number of our partners in a recent piece of research conducted by the Plymouth Health Determinants Research Collaboration, which is one of 10 pioneering HDRCs awarded funding by the National Institute of Health and Care Research to embed a culture of evidence-based decision-making within local government. It's also a question I'm asking the scrutiny panel today at the very start of the plan's review process. Where are we with the Plymouth Plan today? A brief summary of the findings of the HDRC and our subsequent reflections is in the report you've received, but I just want to emphasise the following 3 points. Firstly, that there remains substantial support for continuing to have a plan of the nature of the Plymouth Plan. This was recognised by partners who were heavily involved when the plan was first conceived, but also those with a lower level of awareness of the plan, given that the passage of time since it was first created. Secondly, to keep the plan relevant and used, there is a need to simplify it, focusing on key outcomes rather than detailed policy revisions which are better dealt with at the level of delivery plans rather than the high-level strategy which the Plymouth Plan is. Thirdly, there was a clear sense that the plan needed to be reviewed. Although it has been through some refreshes, it has never been comprehensively reviewed, and as a result, much of what it says is as it was in 2015. Every member here will be aware that so much has happened since 2015. We've had Brexit, a pandemic, a cost of living crisis, a declaration of climate emergency, and the economic fallout from the war in Ukraine, just to name a few things. So as a city, we are also in a great time of opportunity with an agenda to transform our city centre, the city's designation as a national defence growth area, and National Centre for Marine Autonomy. And the government's £4.4 billion investment into HM naval-based Devonport and Babcock's Devonport Royal Dockyard will also shape the city for years to come, in fact decades. So how can this scrutiny panel, how can you contribute and influence the plan review as we commence the process? I think the key thing will be to get your perspective from your own experiences of the plan and whether or not you feel it adequately addresses the most important strategic issues for the city. We want you to help identify what should be in scope for the plan review. One such area from a previous City Council motion on notice is that of play. The review provides an opportunity to look at how play is integrated into the plan. And although the Plymouth Plan itself is a high-level strategy, it is important that it provides the right hooks for delivery plans. The timetable and process for the review are set out in your report. We are currently in stage 1 of that process, and this is where we want to raise awareness of the plan and the need for the review, and also to begin to scope out some of the key issues for it to cover. I hope that this introduction has helped provide some orientation for members to members for our discussion. The only request I would make here is that questions relating to the local plan are held back until the next item of the agenda. We have a good team here to answer any questions, to be involved in your discussion. And additionally, as the report is also covering the motion on notice for play, this is why we have Kate join us today to help us with questions that would not have appeared in the original versions of the plan. So I hand over to yourselves.
Okay, thank you. So
Okay.
I'm imagining, from my perspective, this is a short session. It's kind of just building up to the next item. But if you want to get in now, you can, or we can just leave it till the next element.
Through you, Chair, thank you. This is all very interesting and encouraging, but can you explain how your drafting of the review of the Plymouth Plan, your continuing conversations with partnerships and stakeholders, how aware will we be of the work that they will have done in order to get the information to feed to us. So, you know, from the grassroots as to how the plan is working, how is that fed up to us? Are you confident your partners will be doing a thorough job?
Can I come in there and then I'll lead over to the people who've been directly involved in that. There's ongoing discussions about how the plan works through its process, which led to what I shared earlier on, that people feel the value of it. So if it works for us in terms of spatial planning, and that can't be done without partnership work, it must be working to a great extent for other organisations. But can that extent be greater? And that's what we'll be looking for as we move forward with the plan. So I don't know if somebody wants to come in here to answer that question specifically.
Yes, so as I understood it, the question was how will you as a panel be aware of the future work as it develops? And I think that's, in one sense, a question back to the panel as to how you want to be kept informed of that process. So, I mean, clearly the Plymouth plan is a very strategic plan. It covers a wider remit than the pure remit of natural infrastructure and growth. So there are different ways, I think, in which we can come back to this panel or other panels to help bring you updates at key points. I mean, the programme itself, which is set out is still a draft programme that's set out in the paper, looks ahead really to, I think, the autumn of next year. So things will move relatively swiftly, much more swiftly than with a local plan. And so there will be stages where, so this first stage we're in is really around just raising awareness and inviting input into what should be in the scope of the plan. Is the current plan the right scope, or are there things that you think are missing that should be built in to the review process? From that point on, probably late spring, early summer, we were putting it together into a draft plan before it, and that would be put out again to consultation, and that would provide opportunity for input at that stage into what that looks like, and then ultimately that will come back for the final stage, which will be endorsement, I think, of full council in this particular case because of its nature as a plan, but also we're looking for the endorsement of partnership boards and individual partners, actually, so everyone buys into it as their strategy. So I think along that journey there are opportunities to reconnect back into scrutiny, to be able to ensure that you're kept informed and inputting to that process as we go along.
Thank you. That just about answers it. I just wanted to be sure that you were ensuring that your partners who were feeding into the strategic overview were themselves consulting and working with people in their structures to ensure that the information you're getting, on which the plan will be based, is as thorough as possible, if that makes sense.
Yes, we are working very closely with partners, and they are indeed consulting themselves, really, in terms of their own communities.
Thank you.
I am conscious that most of the meat of it will come into the next item, but if it is related to this, Councillor Holloway.
Thank you. Yeah, it is more top level. Councillor Stevens, thank you for your update into the panel. You mentioned that the original plan was formulated in part out of a frustration that there were many plans, overlapping plans in the city. Arguably, this committee has recently discussed the plan for people and nature, the plan for homes, our economic strategy, as well as the local plan we're having shortly. How many plans are there currently across the council, and how will this super plan, you mentioned the local plan, but how will the Plymouth plan, can you just spell that out a bit more? How many more plans do we have live currently that sit under said plan? Thank you.
Okay. The existing said plan is quite a thick tome, even online, it's many pages. The intention is to slim this down as well, because as you correctly said then, it's a high-level strategic plan. Beneath that sits in the plan for nature, the local plan. That's where the detail and the month-on-month process of delivering those plans will lie. So the intention is to not have as much detail in this plan as it has up to now, because there's a lot of repetition as well. This is the kind of helicopter view of it. Or as I said to John the other day, this is like the chapters page in a book. This is what's in the Plymouth plan with all the different stakeholders and so on, not just the council. Within those chapters then is the detail of individual plans. I'll pass over as well about the number of plans. You mentioned some of those there as well.
Yes, I'm not sure I can produce a precise figure, but what I can say, and I think it's a very pertinent question actually, because one of the issues that we have had, I think, because the plan has been around for over 10 years now, and it's hard to keep something like that relevant and being effective in what it was originally intended to do. And I think there has been a fear that we've been slipping back into sort of lots and lots of separate plans and strategies again. And so this is really an important time to review all of that properly, actually, not just the content of the plan, but the entire delivery framework for the plan, to ensure that we are still maintaining that strategic discipline of having your high-level guiding document with a fewer number of strategic delivery plans linked to it. And then maybe underneath that, there will always be a range of action plans that are maybe more short term. But to maintain that kind of structure requires a lot of effort and work. And I think that's really one of the reasons why the review is important now, because we feel that we've kind of maybe lost a bit of that. And it is something that some of our partners have picked up on as well. And they value the ability for a plan of the nature of the Plymouth plan to create a discipline around that. And it just makes it easier to tell the story of the city, I think, if you have a clear framework within which your kind of your delivery line sits within that strategic framework.
Thank you, that's really helpful. A quick supplementary, I'd be particularly interested in Paul's view on this one as well. The previous plan was obviously, a number of years back. We've had a number of administrations over that period. To what extent does the execution of plans when they're made and developed vary depending on who's actually politically in charge in running the council, or do the plans govern? Like, what's the interplay between those?
From a political perspective, it's a plan that's adopted for the city with a particular lifespan. So obviously, ultimately, it'll go to full council for a discussion and a vote, and seeking approval for it. But once there are certain plans that shouldn't change just because the political colour of a council changes. There should be a structure there that's written out. This is what various stakeholders have said about our city going forward. So it's a collective document. So it would be just in case the chief exec of a health board or some other stakeholder changes, that shouldn't change the whole plan, because we should have a buy-in as a city into the Plymouth plan. And following up what you asked about scrutiny as well, you have a role to shape and ask questions about the matters that underpin your scrutiny panel role. But as the Plymouth plan develops, it's a plan for all sorts of life in the city, education, health, and so on. So it's quite possible that whilst you have a key role in scrutinising us in the national infrastructure and growth, it might actually go to the scrutiny management board for the overall approval of and shape of the plan. So you're not kind of marking your homework, but you have to look at your individual role plus the collective role of, is this plan fit for the city? And Paul will follow up on the...
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, the thinking at the time was, did we really need 156 strategies to explain what the priorities were of the city of Plymouth and its aspirations and ambitions? And so it was a bold and brave decision, both politically and managerially, to say, well, actually, we're going to have this all in one place, where we've got one version of the truth, one vision, one set of strategic approaches, and that has fed through to many, many successful funding bids over the years under administrations of different political complexions, because people who have wanted to invest in the city, whether that's a social investment, an economic investment, an environmental investment, have understood that we're very clear what our priorities are. And I think that's what the Plymouth plan brought. It brought a discipline and a structure. It was always intended to have a focus on delivery. That was always the focus. So I think we were successful in establishing a broad consensus about the direction of travel and then all the various initiatives that different parts of the council would have come to this committee on over the years to talk to you about would have been within that framework. And I think that therefore demonstrates its success over many years. But it is looking its age now in terms of when it was written and the world that existed then. And I think given the scale of challenge that we're now facing, now's the right time to refresh all of that, refresh the vision, refresh the strategic objectives, make sure that partners are making that input, indeed communities are making that input in terms of what our overall direction will be for the next 10 or so years.
Josh and Lauren to finish this segment, and then we'll get into the meat of it all.
Thanks, Chair. Really quick one. So I get the point. This was really novel in 2015. I guess my view now would be, are there other cities, unitary authorities that we can benchmark against, that we can borrow great ideas from, that have developed similar plans in that interim?
I might ask Jonathan if he knows of any. I don't know of any. Whenever we spoke at conferences about what we'd done, there was usually a vast sort of intake of breath that we'd actually been so bold and brave to do what we had done. Because there was probably a reason why we did have an aquatic strategy. I can't tell you what it was, but there was a reason for it, and there would have been reason why there was various planning documents, and there was a reason why there was an economic strategy, and there was a reason why there was this, that, and the other. So I'm not aware of them, but I'm sure there will be some examples where authorities have gone down a similar path and that we can learn from, and that will probably be part of the work of the team. But I don't know if Jonathan knows any specifics.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's something that our partners have asked us to do as well, really, to sort of to look at the best practice, elsewhere. I, though, am not aware that any other city has done this. I've been to talk to a few cities, some of the key cities actually, about it, and they've been astonished that we've done it, and they didn't think they would be able to pull it off in their areas. But I still haven't come across one that has actually tried to create this single integrated plan quite in the same way. But I am going to search, because I think it is really important that we do learn from best practice elsewhere. I mean, when the Plymouth plan itself came about, it was actually inspired by the Portland plan in the United States. So that was the practice that we'd kind of looked at back at that time, because there was nothing more local. But maybe there is now, and we will look. But I'm not aware of any such place at the moment.
Lauren,
can I come in on that, Chair? Sorry, I suppose because we've got Team Plymouth now, which is an organisation of different stakeholders who have a common aim for the city to grow and bring prosperity to the population of the city, and so on, and good well-being, a great place to live. It'd be foolish if we chose to do this in isolation, which that's not the intention, because we're already cutting ourselves off from the potential benefit of doing things together with stakeholders, because everyone will have a different perspective of life in the city. Everyone has a different role to play in that. We can't work in silos anymore. So this format is a cracking format, and the fact that some cities feel that they couldn't do that might actually show how much we've come along in growing positive relationships with people and respectful relationships with other stakeholders.
Lauren, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at the Plymouth Plan annual report from 2024, and I really hear what you've said about this kind of being a helicopter document, one that is kind of a touchstone. What I'm seeing in the 2024 report is a lot of missing data for points, particularly around Healthy City, and my laptop doesn't want to tell me what the other one is, so Healthy City. If we are looking at this as a kind of strategic monitoring doc, I think when I'm considering moving to the next iteration of that, how are we going to be able to benchmark across that kind of long period of time to show how the city is improving in certain areas, maybe faltering in others, so that we have that kind of longevity view of the city? And also, how might we be able to bring in something like we're hearing about Power BI earlier, so AI software to give real-time monitoring of some of these key statistics?
Well, perhaps just talking to Sarah behind me, that the next annual report is shortly to be published, so that will be updating the data. And we always wanted the plan to be data-driven and evidence-driven, and that will show what progress we've made on certain indicators and what progress or lack of progress we might have made on others. I think we would want, as part of the review, to refresh all of those indicators. And I think that work that our colleagues in public health have done in undertaking that initial review has already, I think, initially identified some gaps, hasn't it, in terms of what we could do on indicators.
Yeah, no, I think it's another great point, really, because one of the key challenges I think we've got with this review is asking the question, do we still have the right metrics to be measuring in the first place? Because again, as I say, they're the metrics back from 2015. And I mean, the data that is used is the data that's available. But maybe they're not necessarily the right metrics. And that's one of the things, you know, if you were to say, what is a successful city? Are those the things that we would still pick? And maybe a lot of them are, I don't know, but that's one of the questions that we're putting out there, really, to test the metrics. And I think it's a great point about Power BI, actually, because we've had some great successful use of that as a tool to help bring stuff to life, and we will be exploring that.
Josh, very quickly.
Yeah, really quick, Chair. Following on from that point, because I wholeheartedly agree, you know, could a component of this be actually an online dashboard so that, you know, AI-driven data isn't just fed into a static document, it's fed into something that's live and, you know, is responsive to the people using it.
Yeah, definitely. It was always our vision that the Plymouth plan would be a digitally based document where you could come in at different points, whether you were an investor in the city, a resident in the city, a young person in the city, and you could get out of the document what you needed that it was of interest to you. And that particularly works when it comes to metrics and whether or not we're making a difference on the ground in terms of what the metrics are saying. So I think we were quite successful in achieving that broad objective because we never envisaged it being a great tomb. It was probably longer than we originally intended because of the need to reflect policies across quite a range of social, economic and environmental considerations. But as you've seen in the report, we're looking to streamline that now. So I think there's a real opportunity here to use some of the digital planning initiatives the government are highlighting and the use of AI and other tools in taking forward this version of the plan. Would you agree, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for, thank you, Councillor Steen. A bit of jogging the memory of how long this has all been going on for. And I just think headlines, what was in the air at the time? I just remember thinking the airport and Central Park. It'd be interesting if they're still the two main events. But thank you for that. Let's move on to the next bit, the Plymouth local plan update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And yeah, got Rebecca joining us. Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself, your role in the council?
Good afternoon, members. Hello, I'm Rebecca Miller, the City Planning Manager in the Strategic Planning team.
Okay. We also give apologies that Ali Wagstaff isn't here this afternoon. He couldn't make it. He's unwell. Good afternoon again. We have just heard about the proposed review of the Plymouth plan, and now I have the pleasure of introducing the emerging work on the review of the Plymouth local plan, the next one. The local plan is, in essence, the spatial dimension of the Plymouth plan, setting out our land use policies and proposals for the city. You may have been aware that since 2019, we've had an adopted joint local plan with South Hams and West Devon, and this has been highly effective in guiding development and the determination of planning applications since its adoption. But as a result of changes to the National Planning Policy Framework and the new standard method for housing need, some key elements of the plan are now out of date. The previous government launched proposals to reform the national planning system, and the process of reform has continued under this government, albeit with new priorities, but we don't yet have all the pieces of the jigsaw to be in place to formally start a new local plan process. However, we are able to turn our attention to what we feel should be in scope of our new plan, and to identify what the key issues are that the plan needs to address. Knowing these changes are coming, our planners have begun working in preparing for this, and in January, my predecessor in the strategic planning portfolio, Councillor Mark Coker, approved by executive decision a document called the Local Development Scheme. The LDS sets out a provisional timetable for the next local plan, over what is anticipated to be a statutory 30-month plan production period, plus a 4-month scoping period at the beginning. Subject to the relevant local plan regulations being published in time, the aim is to start the 4-month scoping stage in January 2026. As a city, we have some huge opportunities taking place and on the horizon, with over 4.4 billion of planned investment in the defence industry, the emerging work streams of Team Plymouth, investment in the Freeport, the shortlisting of Plymouth as one of the potential new towns, and partnership working with both MHCLG and Homes England, to name but a few. We have also a number of challenges to face, not least how we seek to meet the government's standard method for housing, which has seen our annual requirement double, balancing growth with preserving a unique environment and meeting the needs of our population. Plymouth has a very proud heritage and outstanding record in developing positive, proactive local plans for the future, and I have every confidence that this will continue as we rise to the challenge of the opportunities now ahead of us. It continues here with this opportunity for the Scrutiny panel to give its views about the direction that the next local plan should take. Your early involvement, alongside that which we've already received from recent ward members, are so important for launching the new local plan process well. I've asked Jonathan Bell and Rebecca Miller to take you through a brief presentation to help inform the discussion. I then look forward to hearing your views and receiving your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. You moving on to the presentation?
Yeah, just going to have to log into the meeting, and I'm slightly nervous that I create a massive feedback loop, but I'll try and avoid that. I'm on mute at the bottom, so, and Rebecca, I'm sure, will help me here. Right, I'm pressing join. Right, do I need to mute up here? Wait, is there a mute? Oh, I've got to press that first, do I? Okay. Is that, marvellous. I've got that wrong nearly every time I've done that, so thankfully I got it right on this occasion, because it's, yes, it's rather horrible when that. Okay, so hopefully this is all going to show on screen now. I've got to, right. Share. Is it this one? Share up here?
I think you need to be in Teams to do it. Do you need to share?
Share.
And then flick up to PowerPoint.
There we go, sorry. Many apologies, members, for my not great IT skills to get us there. I'll try and be brief.
John, how long do you think? Give us a rough time on this.
I'll get this in 5 minutes. Would that suit? I'll aim for 5.
No, don't go too fast, but
10 then.
I've made my point.
We thought this was the meeting, Chair.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be rushed. Just
sure.
You know,
okay. And I'll assume that I'm pretty confident everyone will know what a local plan is, so I won't dwell on certain slides. But I mean, clearly it is an important document for the city, and it's a major piece of the jigsaw, really, in terms of how planning decisions are made and what and particularly informs planning committee. But it also takes a sort of helps articulate a vision for how a city will change and grow over a number of years. The current plan was adopted in March 19. As you know, it's one that we've got with South Hams and West Devon, and it's been governed by a joint local plan partnership board. The reality is the current joint local plan is being replaced by separate local plans, one for Plymouth, and there will be a separate South Hams and West Devon one. So there won't be a joint local plan once the new plans come into place, but it will remain the plan in place until such time, and that will take a number of years. It is worth just mentioning that there are some contextual things that we need to be aware of for this particular plan. Firstly, the national context is quite significant. We've been working, as you will already have heard from Councillor Stevens' introduction, with a new standard method for housing, which has an implication for the city. And there is also an updated national planning policy framework. But there are also a raft of national planning reforms that are still to be finalised. And we actually, probably the key one for us in terms of starting the plan is the new local plan regulations. And we had expected to have received them by now, but they still haven't come out. The latest information from the Housing and Planning Minister is that they're on the verge of coming out. Some guidelines have been published about what these new local plan regulations will say, but the regs still haven't come out. Probably will be early new year. So it will mean that we actually couldn't start by January 2026 because we do not have the regulations in place. So that's just something we've been aware of and we've had to wait for. In terms of the local context, again, Councillor Stevens has also mentioned it in his introduction, but we do have some fairly substantial issues around development and growth that locally the plan will need to respond to. And sub-regionally, we also need to remember this plan does sit within a wider context. So there's a number of partnerships operating at a sub-regional level in terms of transport, in terms of other issues, and also actually working with our neighbours. Now, the Housing and Planning Minister has just announced that the duty to cooperate with neighbours has been cancelled, so that is no longer a requirement of the planning system. However, we are still required to talk to our neighbours, which is obviously a correct thing to be doing to deliver proper strategic planning. But I think the reason for that change is because there's these new things called spatial development strategies that are going to be regional or sub-regional strategies that are going to be put in place. And again, we don't have the precise rules around those yet. So there's a number of things that are still moving, haven't quite settled. Clearly, the plan is important because, as I said already, it's going to set the basis on which planning decisions are made. Councillor Stevens mentioned the local development scheme that Councillor Coker, in his former role as cabinet member, approved under executive decision back in February, I think, this year. And that set out a timetable, but that timetable inevitably will have to slip now because we don't have those regulations in place. I think the key things that we wanted to sort of test out and get your input to as a panel are what should be in scope of the plan. So there are 6 things mentioned in the local development scheme. The first of those is responding to the standard method for housing. The chart that is on the presentation just gives you an indication of what's been happening with housing delivery in the city over the last few years. The dotted line at the top is where the standard method would say we should be aiming to get to. You can see it's only been hit twice in the period of that chart. So that's housing. That's obviously a big challenge for us to consider. We have to consider it. Then there's the economic strategy. How will the plan support the economic strategy? There's a lot of investment coming into the city. I think in your first item on the panel meeting today, you probably heard about some issues around the lack of land for marine employment, for example. So there are important land use issues around how we can support the economic growth of city, and it's also about strategic connectivity as well. Thirdly, we need to recognise that Plymouth actually is a regional city. It's just not a city in isolation. It serves its wider hinterland, and so what are the issues? How can we then build upon the role of the city centre and the role of big facilities in the city around health and other issues that serve the wider area, and we ensure good connectivity to those places, and also the unique natural environment that we have in the city with the marine, surrounded by national park, national landscapes, etc. Fourthly, the transformational change that we're anticipating in the city centre is going to be a big sort of challenge we feel for the next local plan. That's the fourth thing we've identified. Fifthly, how do we make Plymouth more accessible and well connected? And how do we provide for the things that local communities need close to their homes? That's another kind of big area of which we think should be in the scope of the plan. And also, how do we connect people to nature and the natural environment? And the final one is really the challenge that is around climate, making the city more climate resilient and making the city more reducing its level of carbon emissions in line with the climate emergency declaration. So that is going to be a massive issue. Obviously, we're aware, aren't we, from our day-to-day experience now of the risk, for example, from flooding and drains being overwhelmed and things like that. And if we're going to plan for the city in a way that doesn't make that worse, how do we do that? It's a very big challenge for us. Sorry, there is a seventh, isn't there? Planning for the infrastructure that we need to deliver a sustainable city. We've, as the city grows, we're going to need more infrastructure to enable that growth to be sustainable, and we will need to update our infrastructure needs assessment and our infrastructure delivery plan to show how that can be delivered. And that's the end of the presentation, and I've just left a question up there that might be helpful for this conversation.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I really appreciate I always like the succinctness of it, of your words, and the slides are very helpful that we've all read before the meeting. One of the first things that springs to mind, can we, John, hold fire. Can you go back?
Sorry.
Can you go back to that? Because I wanted to reflect
Sorry,
on the slide.
I'll get back. Sorry, I've just taken it off now, haven't I?
While you're doing
I'll let you ask your question while Rebecca helps me.
I'll talk about it, okay?
Yeah.
Page 61 of our report is obviously how many houses we're building, okay? And this is the thing that really scares me. I've raised it in various forums about our house building, and Rebecca, I've raised it with you when we've had I've been trying to get my head around how we can sort out a plan for Plymouth with the targets that we're supposed to meet. They're all in front of us. You know, it was 220, not even houses, dwellings. So you're putting into the figures here, like a student block in Drake or some offices in Drake, for instance, that have been turned into HMOs. The figures are so small and tiny. I've always said, for instance, moving forward, that putting in student accommodations isn't really in the spirit of house building targets. But with all that said, we're a million miles away from getting to what our actual aspirations are at the moment with our partners in South Hams, West Devon. Okay, we're a million miles away from that, and then it's like another planet to get to. This has all come from Angela Rayner's 1.5 million homes by the 1.5 million homes across the country by the time their term of office finishes in 2029. How can we even get our heads around this, guys? I'm just thinking from a departmental aspect of trying to develop something that seems so unreachable. It must be demoralising.
Well, it's a challenge. I think the first point to make is that only very recently have we been behind the targets in the joint local plan that we set ourselves. So the joint local plan had a provision for 660 dwellings per annum, and we were achieving that. So it's only recently that we've not been achieving that. As you rightly say, Chair, the figures for recent years have been very low, and there will be a variety of reasons for that in terms of the context in which investment decisions are being made around housing, the viability of housing, the challenges that various sites have. Every site's got its own story. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the 660 dwellings per annum was based upon the population needs of the city at the time that the joint local plan was put in place and adopted in March 2019. The standard method is a supply side calculation, which basically requires us to now deliver 1,280 dwellings per annum. That is a huge challenge, whether we were hitting the previous local plan targets or not. As I say, and I deliberately repeat, we were delivering on those targets, but even if the most recent couple of years were better than they have been, we would have still had a huge challenge of, as Jonathan said, doubling the housing numbers. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? It means that we're going to have to look at a whole range of sites across the city to meet that 1,280 figure. It means the intensification of the urban fabric of the city. It means the role of the city centre in terms of intensification within the city centre and adjacent to the city centre, and it probably means a more significant role than historically has been the case in relation to tall buildings in the city. Historically, we haven't had many tall buildings in the city, largely because after the war there was a need to rehouse the population very quickly, and so we saw northern expansion of the city, sort of north of the Parkway, as opposed to what we saw in some other English cities at the time of deck access flats, although we had some in Plymouth, but a major provision of high-rise buildings. So it's going to mean a whole variety of things of that nature, and probably also looking at the existing housing stock. There's 120-odd thousand homes in the city at the moment, and some of those may lend themselves to conversion to self-contained flats in a way that perhaps historically hasn't happened in Plymouth. So all of that will probably come into the equation. We clearly need to think about the overall strategy that we're pursuing. Where should that growth go? Currently, we have 3 growth areas in the city. Should there be a 4th, for example, related to Devonport? Should there be a focus on the main transport corridors in the city where growth should be accommodated? The strategy that we pursue has to also be considered alongside other factors like the impact on the environment and, as Jonathan said, the infrastructure needs that goes alongside this. So is it a huge challenge? Yes, it is. Are we coming from recently a low base? Yes, we are. But the reality is, as we know, that there's a significant housing crisis, and we need to make provision for a whole range of homes, including specifically affordable homes and social rented homes. I mean, I note your reference to student accommodation, but the fact is that is allowed in the calculation that the government has done, governments of all colours have done over the years. That is allowed to be part of the calculation as to the provision of dwellings for a particular area.
Thank you for your comprehensive reply. I understand we can do that, but my argument's always been we shouldn't do it, and it's not in the spirit of when you see announcements from government ministers about house building, people don't really assume it's going to be a breakdown as it is with student accommodation and such like. That's just the headlines, how people think. But do we feel, we've obviously got this situation in front of us. What I think probably people are worried about, are we chucking all our chips in with Homes England here to sort of get us out of this? And what I worry is that we rush into something that really causes great pain. We've seen what happens when we do, because the city centre is, everyone's passionate about the city centre. It's the central point of Plymouth, yeah? And we've seen how emotional people get about regeneration of the landscape, yeah? We could have part 2 here with the accommodation strategy when people see buildings appearing that may be subject to opinions. Just look at the civic centre. Some people like it, some people don't. How are we going to mitigate that and reassure the people that we will do things at a controlled pace that are in line to how we want our city to look?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously Homes England and their access to funding and to various powers is a crucial partner to be on board. We've worked with them over a number of years in a very positive way, but it would probably be fair to say that in more recent times, under the Chief Exec's leadership, that we've got onto a different level with that relationship, particularly in relation to the city centre. But of course, we're talking with other investors as well, mainly private sector investors, but also registered providers, housing associations, who will also have multi-million pound investment programmes that we will want to target to the sites that exist in Plymouth. There's, I think I'm right in saying, about 115 sites in the joint local plan that are allocated for housing. Many of them have been built, but some of them haven't. Some of them have planning permission, but again, many of them don't. So it's about trying to join up the investment opportunity, whether that's Homes England, the housing associations or private developers, on those development opportunities where our own local plan already says we support the principle of housing to meet housing need on those sites. So I think, again, I wouldn't underestimate the challenge. We know that there are viability and other challenges in Plymouth, but I think it's got to play a role. We've looked at the city centre over many years. We've missed economic cycles, which is why we've not seen major regeneration programmes in the city centre in the past, despite our best efforts over the years. I mean, to give you some idea, The average number of homes in most large English cities is 8,000 homes. Most English cities across the country have been pursuing city centre regeneration programmes, public realm investment programmes, to fundamentally change the nature of their city centres, alongside cultural investment that makes them places where people want to live. That's what we're trying to do. But we come from a base where the number of homes in the city centre in Plymouth, obviously because of the circumstances of the war, is 800 compared to 8,000. So, but the opportunity, the scale of the opportunity, I think is incredibly exciting, creating a place where people will want to live as part of living in Plymouth.
Can I follow that up as well? Thank you, Paul. I wrote the word excitement down here as well. I can understand why some people, you mentioned, have different emotions, thinking, oh, I like the city centre as it is. But we're denying choice here for people who would like to live in the city centre. And it's not just young people. It could be older people who wanted to scale down and be closer to the places that matter to them. So, and the emphasis on its homes as well, homes of different styles, meeting different demographics. It'll also bring an economic boost to the city centre. We are fortunate in that we're not having to build over green fields and expand cities. We've got the infrastructure that you would normally have to have as part of building a new town in the city centre. To support that would be good. I would love to live in the city centre. So there's one person anyway. So we both cancel each other out. But I'm sure there's more. A lot of people are quite excited because think of the scores of students, scores of thousands of students who come to Plymouth, and they may live in cities, they get kind of surprised by the city centre being relatively quiet after 5:30. I've said before, I used to live in Wembury when I first came here. Wembury was busier than at 5:30 than Plymouth city centre. So there is this opportunity for homes to be built in the city, not overnight, different style of homes, and I welcome the opportunity to be bold in doing this. And in having people able to be moved from other parts of the city, it could actually free up those homes for other people as well. So we've got a growth agenda that is happening. We have to meet that growth sensitively. I get we're not going to have concrete jungles.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. So on what was page 53, or one of the early slides in the deck, you have the graph, or the first one, in fact, you have the graph of the image, of the joint local plan merging into the Plymouth local plan. Now, as Councillor Stevens, you presented to us at last full council on local government review, reorganisation, major endeavour for the city. We also, in parallel, have a new combined authority mayor model, potentially covering all of Devon. To sort of paraphrase your quote of excitement, Councillor Stevens, isn't this premature excitement about this plan? Shouldn't be, how can we draft now for something when the city is going to have, potential broadening of borders and a metro mayor which will have combined authority mayor, that will have powers, that will have jurisdiction in part of this? Isn't this all a bit soon?
We need to do it, or we can't just hold back until what is about to happen will happen. So we had the discussion about this because it's a question I raised as well. What if our LGR plans come to fruition, and what would happen with that? And I've had an answer from Paul, and he can explain it to you to know far more eloquently as I can.
It's a good question.
But were you convinced by said answer?
Oh yeah. I am. Yes.
I'll wait for that answer before I answer.
No, I am, because and actually the process of what we've done with LGR, in terms of consultation with the parishes, knowing about the parishes, valuing them more, and knowing what they feel would be welcomed by becoming one larger authority, knowing about their fears of becoming one authority, but equally, where they are the same as your neighbourhoods in the city. They all need jobs. They need homes for people to live. People they know need homes. So I am convinced, and this is why.
If I could say one thing before you dive in, Paul, is I guess the sort of thing is how can we write a plan when there might be 50 to, I can't remember the exact number, but 50 to 80,000 people who won't be covered by it? I mean, that's sort of fairly fundamental, right?
Yeah, so, the government's answer, before I get into my answer, the government's answer is, can you just get on with it all simultaneously, please? So whether we're talking about the spatial development strategies that the mayoral strategic authority will be responsible for, i.e. the mayoral strategic authority that doesn't yet exist for Devon. So that's the first point, because the spatial development strategies are supposed to set out that overall growth on a regional scale. So there's the spatial development strategy dimension to your question. Then there's the issue of the local plan. Well, of course, the joint local plan already covers the very area that we are talking about in terms of Plymouth expanding its boundary. We were working alongside our colleagues in South Hams and West Devon, but played a key leadership role in putting the joint local plan together. So the plan that currently covers the 13 parishes of the proposed LGR extension for Plymouth is already covered by the existing joint local plan. And as Jonathan said, that will remain in place until it's replaced. Jonathan will come in on the local development scheme issue in a sec and the regulations, but there's no reason why we can't be doing some basic collation of evidence and the issues that the plan's got to tackle, because the plan always has to look beyond its boundaries in terms of infrastructure. Housing market areas go beyond Plymouth. Plymouth's housing market area goes well beyond the border of the city in Devon. So does its functional economic area, so does its travel to work area. So there's always been a requirement on local planning authorities to talk to their neighbours, as was said earlier, to have those discussions. I mean, clearly in the past, when we had something called the Devon Structure Plan, that's what led to Cranbrook and Sherford being proposed as new settlements as part of answering the provision for housing all those years ago. But we now face a new set of challenges, both economic, social and environmental, that the new plan's got to address. So in part, one of the issues will be we can get on with the preparation of some initial pieces of work that we need to do to support the plan. And then obviously we're waiting on government in terms of LGR, in terms of when they announce what their response to the statutory consultation on LGR at some point early in the new year.
Councillor McLean. Councillor McLean. Oh, did you? Okay, sorry, I didn't see your light. I think you.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, thank you. Actually, because the start of the plan process, which, as I explained earlier, we're going to need to push back because the regulations haven't yet been published. That starts with what's called scoping. So it's not even the formal start of the plan making process when you do the scoping stage. That's a minimum of 4 months after you formally start the scoping stage. In reality, I think the timing's probably going to work out all right, that we will know where the government is going in relation to LGR. But clearly we can only plan for the area that we have legal responsibility over. And the government has said that they do not want LGR to be a reason for any local planning authority to delay starting their local plans. But I feel kind of with the timings of things, and also the fact that, as Paul says, we've got a joint local plan already. A lot of our evidence that we're using to underpin the plan will be sub-regional evidence. It won't just be city evidence. And South Hams indeed have already started their work on their new local plan. In the event that there was a change to our boundaries, I think it should be relatively straightforward and early enough to be able to make a switch. So I think it doesn't. I don't think it leads to a conclusion that we need to defer what we're doing, especially given actually we're already going to have to be deferring because of the regulation situation. I hope that's of some help.
Really helpful answers, thank you. I think it's not a question, it's just a comment, but I think this spirit, as Plymouth expands, we've got to be doing that in everything we do for the potential new part of Plymouth. It needs to be with, not to, and I think that narrative needs to come through in how this goes forward as well, but thank you.
Laurie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really glad Councillor Holloway picked up on the LGR piece, because I was reading through it and like this just feels like the elephant in the room that hasn't been addressed. So thinking about that kind of LGR piece moving forward, and also the kind of consultation that's taken place with councillors and that kind of engagement, that kind of call for sites, I think is a two-pronged question. So how will councillors be informed that sites in their ward have kind of been identified, but also how might we use the kind of neighbourhood network model from the LGR piece to feed into our local plan in advance of LGR coming to fruition, because they feel like really complementary to me.
Well, I'll pick up the LGR question, then Rebecca or Jonathan will pick up on the how we're engaging members. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we, for the reasons you'll recall, that we were quite high level in our answer to the question about how local government reorganisation was going to deal with neighbourhood networks, and that was our answer to the government in terms of that particular LGR question that had been posed to us. But it clearly represents a brilliant opportunity to have a different relationship with citizens and communities about the planning of their area. I mean, some members may recall many years ago we did community planning studies, and that formed the basis of the plans that then came forward after that. So that community and citizen engagement is crucial as part of the process. As indeed is member engagement. We've done various member specific ward member sessions about all the issues faced by members and their communities in their wards in relation to whether it's housing issues, a derelict site causing problems, transport issues, whatever the issues are. So I think we will start from the premise that we want to have the fullest engagement, because clearly communities and members have a knowledge of their area that is crucial for us in doing the planning that we need to do for those areas and for the city as a whole. But in terms of the specifics around sites, Jonathan or Rebecca, do you want to pick up on how we're going to engage members on those?
I think what I would say is that there's the whole process, the whole process is which we're just actually learning from the guidance that the government has only just published last week, has certain key points of engagement built into it. And so there's a stage of engagement at the scoping stage I just mentioned. Then there's a stage of engagement around visioning and strategy, and along that. So at each place, I think we need to be thinking how best to engage members, either at ward level in relation to sites when that's the conversation, or at a more strategic level when that's the conversation, because the conversation will shift as we go through the process. We won't always be at the detail of sites. Sometimes it will be more at the what are the strategic spatial options for how the city might grow. So I think what we would want to do, and working with Councillor Stevens, is work out the best plan for sort of ensuring that there's member engagement all the way through that process. And it may well be that as a panel you have views as well that you want to recommend that are considered for that, because we're at a very, very early stage. But clearly it's going to be vital that we want to take everyone on board on this journey, because it affects every part of the city.
And also we want to share cross-party engagement as well, that's essential. But you brought up the LGR, a huge amount that was done during LGR was really productive, and that will, the processes of community engagement will feed into this process as well.
Josh, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, my question was going to be around LGR, local plan, JLP interaction, but to be honest, I feel that's been really well covered, and Paul made the point on JLP, being in existence, so that covers that. I think, you also made a point yourself, Chair, around sort of, valid concerns of people not wanting change within the city centre. I myself feel the excitement that John alluded to, Councillor Stevens, and I just wondered whether, with 850 people living in the city centre, if you could kind of maybe reiterate some of the other locations that have regenerated their city centres to try and change their fortunes, because I see it as a real opportunity. Yeah, thanks.
Well, they're many and varied, and they've all done various things. But I mean, Leeds, Sheffield, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle. There are many places that have transformed their city centres. Part of that has been about the need to provide housing. A big part of it has been about, I'm thinking particularly of Sheffield in this context, and Meadow Hall, the impact that out-of-town retailing had on some of the centres where it was the view of the government at the time that these things could be put in place in large freestanding greenfield sites on the edge of cities, and then looked slightly surprised that this decimated the city centres that they were close by. That was particularly the case with Sheffield. We've resisted that in Plymouth, so our city centre has been protected by and large from out-of-town development. So retail provision was a key issue. Of course, retailing is changing now. It's more of an experiential issue. So people aren't just coming in to shop, they're coming in for more of a leisure and cultural offer. And of course, that's the last piece of the jigsaw as well. A lot of the city centres, Liverpool, I'm thinking particularly of Liverpool, have invested a lot in public realm improvements and in cultural offers that attract people to the city centre. So it's been multi-layered in most cities, but if you look at most of the big English cities, they've all pursued that type of regeneration agenda.
Thank you, Chair. And I think that's reassuring that it's those types of cities that we're looking at. You know, we're not looking to Reading or somewhere else. We're looking to cities that are actually achieving great things for their people. So thank you.
And actually, it's important, Chair, and Josh as well, that as we develop as Plymouth as a place. We don't superimpose another model from another city into the city centre, but we learn what works, because it's essential that Plymouth city centre retains its Plymouth heritage, Plymouth character as well.
Could I add just on that point that that's part of the commission that we're about to commence, and it's the point that Chair made quite rightly, which is there will be concerns that people have about the city centre and its reconfiguration. And we must learn from others, but we must also learn, from some of the potential mistakes others made. It must be Plymouth specific, and I think we're about to make an appointment as part of the Town in the City initiative for consultants to come on board to help in that master planning work that will take these issues forward in terms of sensitively responding to those issues, because there are transport issues, there are design issues, there are heritage issues, there are public realm issues, there are infrastructure issues, there are housing issues in all of that.
Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. It was really encouraging to hear Paul talk about having a different relationship with citizens and their role in designing neighbourhoods, because we have in the city local neighbourhood plans in place. We have one that has taken years to get to a point where it's being submitted. And the people involved in that local plan have spent a huge amount of time and effort, put a lot of work in, consulted widely. Can I have some sort of assurance, therefore, that some of the ideas that are in that neighbourhood plan, and I accept that elements of it are not in conformity with the current joint local plan, but time and effort's gone in, and there are lots of quite good ideas in there as well. I just don't want to see that plan popped on a shelf and ignored. So if I could have some assurance that it won't be ignored when we're producing the final plan.
I'll just introduce that bit and then hand over to Paul. Is that, as I shared in the full council when we put the LGR proposal forward, it's essential we retain what works and perhaps give an opportunity to other communities to actually develop their own version of neighbourhood working as well. Because what we saw when we had the LGR process, that parishes are very important to their local community, and because of the size of those parishes, lots of the residents who fed back during the LGR process felt they had a connection with the local issues that parishes had some responsibility for. And they were generated by local people for local people. So without getting into a Royston Vasey scenario, I think it's really important that we capture that, because even though 13 parishes will have their own distinct character, so will the different parts of Plymouth have a distinct character as well. So we need to kind of harness that and listen to and respond to neighbourhoods how they wish to move forward.
Yes, I mean, the provisions of the Localism Act and its support for neighbourhood plans, we have a duty as a local planning authority to support communities who want to bring forward a neighbourhood plan for themselves. So that duty continues, and there's nothing in the LGR changes or in the planning legislation changes. There's a few modifications that the about to receive royal assent planning and infrastructure bill makes, but the substance of the neighbourhood planning approach is retained by the government. So that certainly can give an assurance that in relation to there's an adopted neighbourhood plan in the city, but as you say, there are other plans that had got to various stages. We don't want to lose the thinking and the creativity that's got into those plans. So as part of the evidence gathering exercise, we will look at all of that anyway, and things that we think are a part of whatever the emerging strategy will be. And the emerging approach, if there are ideas that we can accommodate, then we certainly will accommodate those ideas.
Councillor Bannerman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at page 67.7, so providing a range of housing choices. I believe I'm right in saying that anyone who's under 35 will receive a shared room rate on housing benefit. And our more youthful younger population are normally in employment that receives a lower salary. So I was wondering, have we got enough houses of multiple occupation? Do we need more? Are we considering whether we need any more purpose-built houses of multiple occupation?
Yeah, I don't know the nuances of the rates, but certainly Plymouth obviously has some of the existing housing clearly plays a role in the private rented market in terms of the role it plays, and there are policies in the current local plan that seek to support appropriate houses of multiple occupation. We also have an Article 4 direction that limits that in relation to the area around the university. It'll be a policy question I think we need to have a look at in terms of are those policies still fit for purpose from those that we put in the local plan? Do we need to take a different approach? We'd obviously be talking with Matt and his team in Community Connections in terms of the role we see for that usually existing housing stock. In terms of purpose-built HMO accommodation, I mean, the market tends to be for rather than housing multiple occupation as such. There are different models out there now with co-living and things, but it tends to be private rented sector, and they tend to be of a certain specification, and they tend to be self-contained rather than unself-contained HMO accommodation. But we would look at that with Matt and his team in terms of the role that how HMOs play in meeting housing need. I don't know if that answers your question, but
so just a quick supplementary. So the Plymouth Local Authority rates for housing benefit is for a shared room rate for a month is £398.88. So that's anyone who's under the age of 35 and needs accommodation. If you've ever looked for a shared accommodation or a one-bedroom flat, you are not getting one in Plymouth for that rate. So I'm just thinking of our younger population is how do we support them? If they don't have parents that can put them up until they're 35, how can they live without being in crisis, really, and poverty?
yeah, I mean, it's part of the housing needs assessments that Matt and his team do in Community Connections, which feeds into the work of the Plymouth of the plan for homes that the housing delivery team in my area sort of respond to. So whether that's specialist forms of housing or, as you say, that type of affordable accommodation. So it certainly will be a policy issue that we look at as part of developing the plan.
Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. Just to acknowledge the League of Gentlemen reference, that was very much appreciated, and this is, I'm sure, a local plan for local people. In the joint local plan, there is policy PLY 19 on Central Park around it as a strategic green space site. I I represent a ward, Drake, which is adjacent to Central Park, and it is an area of significant import to residents I'm proud to represent. It is fair to say, I think, that there might have been a bit of a shake in confidence to some of the principles contained in PLY 19 following the sale of Pound's House and the associated land around it. And principally, I'm thinking of the commitment in the joint local plan to protect and enhance the park's historic features, also aspects around protecting the greenery and trees and such. Obviously, in the Pound's House example, we had the post hoc tree management order that was placed on the trees on the sold land. But it's fair to say it's been an area of some consternation of residents. So my question is, what reassurances, principally to Councillor Stevens, but also to the rest of the panel, can you provide that this local plan and indeed the overall approach of the council will continue to protect Central Park under the tenets of the PLY 19 policy that commits to Central Park as a strategic green site?
Okay, I'll say something, and then I'll grab the experts in terms of application of regulations comes in. The local plan covers obviously homes, it's a critical part of it, places for employment, leisure, but equally the blue and green spaces are essential as well. They are lungs and places to be for communities. We don't want just the Plymouth Sound or significant parks to be, and green spaces to be, the only places that are kind of considered when we're moving forward. So I think, through consultation, through looking at the existing joint local plan, there are principles there that, some ward members might have suggested some duff spaces. They couldn't give a colour for it because there were some duff spaces for housing in their wards. But equally, within wards and across the city, we should value the green spaces where they provide an important amenity for those who live near them and further away. But I can give you Paul now, and he can explain the regulation issue and difference between homes, land use, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a difference between land disposals and the basis upon which land disposals are made, and the application of planning policy to a subsequent planning application. So I'll sort of make that point first. I mean, clearly, all the policies that we currently have will be reviewed as part of the preparation of the next local plans. Have they achieved their objective in whole or in part? Have they simply not been applied because development proposals have not come forward where they've been tested? Has there been unintended consequences with things? All of those things will be considered alongside, the opportunities to reinforce some of those policies in terms of the strength of the objectives that they're trying to set out. I mean, we've had a long-standing policy of support for Central Park as a strategic green space, and I would imagine that policy would be refreshed broadly in the context of the evidence work that we will subsequently do on the green spaces in the city. But I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Not a lot to add, really. I mean, it's clearly such a crucial lung in the city, isn't it? And so it would be hard to imagine kind of diverting really from what PLY 19 already aspires to do in terms of protecting its key role. But obviously that we've got a process to go through with a local plan, which involves engagement, and I'd expect that would be one of the ones that we would expect a lot of engagement on.
Thank you. You can see the tension, can't you? We've historically had this protection, and although that applies, as Paul has outlined, to specific parts of planning policy, the experience that people read about in the news is a sort of shift from protecting the historic asset and the trees there. So if there's anything further you want to add to provide reassurance to my residents, to residents in nearby areas, that this council is 100% committed to Central Park as per PLY 19, that would be very welcome.
I think the assurance I could give is to just restate the obvious point, which is that the current policy of this council is that policy set out in our adopted plan. So any proposal that came forward for whatever use that was inconsistent with that policy would be likely to be refused as not meeting the provisions of the policy. So if somebody said to me, what is your position as a council on Central Park, I would point them to that policy. That would be my first part of the answer. The second part of the answer would be to just use this as an illustration of where you as members, both ward members and members of Scrutiny, but also residents and community groups who have a view on these matters. I'm sure there are people who have, judging from past experience on Central Park, people who have a view about Central Park. How can that policy be improved? You know, are there things that we've learnt over the years about how that policy has come into play that we can reflect upon in crafting, let's call it the new policy for Central Park? So I would use that as an example of, okay, what does it currently say? Can it be stronger on this? Can it say more on that? Can it encourage something more in terms of the nature of uses that we want to support, in terms of the nature of that strategic green space? That's where you as ward councillors, you as Scrutiny members, and indeed the community groups and residents that we want to engage in this process can feed directly into that to say, well, actually, I mean, I don't know what people might say about that policy, but they might say, well, we're broadly supportive, but we think it could be stronger on this, this and this. And that's the conversation we want to have.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And arguably, if you have that provision in the JLP, but you're still able to sell off part of the park, my view is that means it can probably be strengthened for the next iteration. Thank you.
Councillor Smith. Share.
Weird. I think with reference particularly to the plans for the city centre, which I personally think are exciting, what kind of, it's on now, what kind of importance and weight is going to be given to considerations around the nighttime economy? Because I think as John alluded to, you know, the city centre's dead after 5:30. But if we're going to go from 800 odd people to 8,000 people living in the city centre, that's obviously no longer going to be the case. The nighttime economy will really develop. And that won't just be relevant for people living in the city centre. That will inevitably mean that people who don't live in the city centre come into the city centre more after 5:30. So particularly with reference to kind of making sure we have this kind of well-connected, accessible city, what consideration is the joint local plan going to be giving to that, and what kind of importance?
Yeah, and you are right. That's a good question you raised, because it's not just about houses. It's about being connected within the city and being connected from different parts of the city as well. So, and obviously there would be planning regulations that would apply at various stages of development of the city centre. But this is an opportunity, not as will be outlined in the joint local plan as part of that development, that as well as bricks and mortar, it's about how do we move people around the city in a sustainable way, not just repeat the ways we do things now and just extend that, but having a chance to refresh our vision for travel modes, eco-friendly travel modes, reliable travel modes. And essentially, there's no way everyone who will live in the city centre will have a car. And lots of the evidence will suit this, that fits this scheme, is that many people who choose to live in the city centre choose not to have a car, you know, for various reasons. But if that's the choice you have to make, it's then a spur for us to have effective connectivity within the city centre and without. And obviously with the station not being far from the city centre, there's lots of opportunities to make that more an attractive access point. Anything to add?
Josh, you got a quick one?
Yes, yeah, very quick one. So we've heard about lots of exciting plans and pipeline for building and development in the city, and I like Councillor Stevens' point on, you know, ensuring that those plans, you know, were focused on Plymouth itself and any learnings came back to Plymouth. But I wonder, you know, one of the concerns when there's lots of building and development is the design code. How as a local authority do we ensure that, you know, the outcome of all this building is the best architecture we can possibly strive for?
Yes, another very good question. I mean, in the previous Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, there was a rather, some would say, labyrinthine approach to design codes at a city level and various levels underneath that. I don't know the detail, but I think I'm right in saying, I'll look to Rebecca and Jonathan, this government has basically emphasised the importance of design codes as delivering that, the quality of placemaking in the round. So clearly that applies not just to buildings, but to the places that will make the city centre, and indeed other neighbourhoods, places where people will want to live. So it is about the broader placemaking issues. Design codes are about not just about architecture and fenestration and building styles. They're obviously, and I know your question was beyond that, it's about placemaking. And so, but there are some issues. You know, there are many developments that have happened in the city where there's been the ubiquitous use of render, for example. We're in a harsh marine environment. You know, some of those developments that themselves are well liked by communities who live in them. Some of them in regeneration areas in the city, but where perhaps the quality of materials is rather lacking. So I think the design code approach, which will be built into the new local plan, as I understand it, will be something that we will have to look at in terms of how far do we want to push that in terms of the nature of the buildings and the nature of the materials that we want to see in a future Plymouth.
Yeah, no, it is a really great question, and design codes are being used in a number of different ways, actually. So we have to assess what the future development capacity of the city is, and so to help define that, we're trying to use design codes at the very outset to so different models of development might fit into some sites better than others. So we're using some design code work to help inform the site allocations in the first place. And then that can also help inform what the policy provision around that site might be. And there's an opportunity to, for certain sites, particularly maybe some of the larger ones, more strategic ones, to actually include design guidance specific in the new local plan and make it a more of a visual, plan rather than kind of just the words we've got in the current plan. So, in other words, give some illustrations of what these kinds of forms of development could potentially look like. And indeed, we, for the city centre, for example, we have a 3D model, and it might be that we can develop 3D modelling out a bit further afield, because design is something that you kind of almost need to be able to visualise as well as read in words to help bring it to life and understand it. So it is an area that we want to sort of explore more as we go through this process and invest in it and pitch it at the right levels, because clearly the quality of place is essential. If there's going to be a lot of development, you want it to look good and to feel like it's part of a place and not just be kind of random.
Chair, I think that will be really reassuring for residents. I think, when we look across the UK, I think communities look at planning committees as the place to sense check and safeguard, high quality design. But as we know, that's quite often, it's primarily about policy and where things fit into current guidelines. And I think this kind of approach and a move towards that is going to force us to have better architecture in our city.
Okay, brilliant. So I think we've had a good session on this. Just put some notes down here. I think we have to embark on this. You could argue there's so many things happening that you shouldn't start now, but I think we need to control our own destiny. There's nothing more frustrating being a regular visitor to the planning committee when you're trying to oppose something and then you get the usual lines. We don't have a 5-year housing land supply, so, we need to get, our own house in order so we can take control of our own destiny. Plymouth is unique. It's not, as much as I like Manchester and Liverpool and great cities, for me, Plymouth's number one. And it's a unique situation that we have from the train station to the city, through the city centre to the waterfront. It's a phenomenal situation, which you can't really compare, to be quite honest with you. So trying to compare for comparing's sake isn't always the best thing to do. So what the fears are, and I'm sure that's what we want to mitigate, is that a load of blocks start appearing. skyscrapers start appearing, which will destroy everything about our city. And I'm sure that won't happen, but these are fears, these are things that have come up through the Homes England. How are we going to get 10,000 people into a city centre? Well, the only way is up. And how good's that going to look? What's the shape and feel going to be? So that's always going to be part of it. Yes, it is exciting, Councillor Stevens. It is exciting. Any development's exciting, but it's also full of stress. Stress will occur through experience, and Paul knows this, when maps are presented to councillors and they suddenly see things that are earmarked for development. And that can cause rushes of blood for residents and councillors. I never thought that houses would ever be proposed in Central Park, but they were. And if you refresh a plan, anything is possible. I know what Paul's saying. Anything. So with these targets that we have to meet, anything is possible. So don't expect the unexpected. Don't expect that there might not be a proposal for some houses in Central Park somewhere. Just a little bit here and there. It'll all be presented in due course. So far, so good as far as getting us involved. Particularly Rebecca's sessions where we talk about it, and that's going to continue for councillors to look at their own neighbourhoods. I'm personally passionate about, as the colleagues are, about keeping our community assets, keeping our pubs open, keeping our dental surgeries open, having protections, making sure there aren't too many HMOs in the community, and the debate about the percentages on this street and that street. I don't think there should be percentages. It should be there's an article for, end of story. All these sort of things will be teased out. So it's been a great session. Really appreciate it. It's going to go on for years because the time frame suggests we won't be getting there till 2028. So it'll be an ongoing discussion, but it's great to have it at this forum. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come in on one thing, please? Because you mentioned it in the same sentence, almost Central Park and skyscrapers. Central Park isn't included in the new town in the city geographic area, just in case somebody misconstrued that question.
But Central Park will be part of an overall Plymouth plan.
It would be, but I just wanted to make sure that you
Everything's
and
in
anybody
there.
watching with an interest that it doesn't have the new towns and skyscrapers doesn't apply to the geographical area of Central Park.
I know what you're saying. I think people won't jump into that conclusion, but if you want to put it out there, it's fair enough. Josh, you got something to say?
Yeah, really quick one, Chair. You made a comment about the only way is up, but actually we've also seen in the last 20 years, particularly in London, this boom of renovation, the build of basement and basement culture. So it isn't the only way. We could also go down.
Fair one, fair one. Anything is possible, like I say. It's not a crazy assumption to believe that a strong possibility is up, but yes, you can go down. Right. Next item, Hannah will take a few minutes to get everyone together, is, I've lost my mind, tree management principles. Best panel we've got. Great panel members. Okay, so I am the clock watcher. I'm not saying we need to do everything justice, but just be mindful of the time. If we can try and get messages out, questions in, answers back in as quick as way we can, that would be great. So without further ado, tree management principles, Tom.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
So again, thanks for having me. Take two. This item is something that's been a long time coming, and I guess I want to briefly just set the wider political picture before Chris and Kat run through some of the technical details in the slides. And I want to start off with the fact that something which sometimes gets forgotten is that Plymouth is an incredibly green city in the visual sense of the word, that we have hundreds of thousands of trees as a city, and we're incredibly lucky to have that on our doorstep. And it would be remiss of me not to mention why that is such an exciting fact. And so, you know, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but the wider benefits of trees are so wide and varied, from flood resilience to biodiversity, from carbon sequestration and urban cooling to air quality, to some quite surprising things. There's really interesting research about the way in which street trees in particular can boost well-being, and things that would completely surprise many people, like reduction in crime rates, for instance, with street trees, and impacts on speeding, and so many things just from having trees outside people's windows. The city and the City Council have historically done some really important work in this space. Not least the Plymouth South Devon Community Forest and the Plan for Trees, which was came through under Sue, and was a leading light then in terms of national work on this space. But I want to also be honest about the kind of elephant in the room, and the fact that as an administration, we've had to work hard to rebuild this council's environmental reputation based on what we'd inherited previously. And that has been a challenging roller coaster, and one that we're continuing to grapple with. But on the flip side, the more positive side, particularly in the last year, there's been some huge national and international recognition, not just for tree planting, but for how we manage and celebrate our city's canopy as well. So most recently, the Tree City of the World status, which is international accreditation based on a whole range of criteria. The last few weeks, becoming the second only city in the UK to be a nature city as part of the Nature Towns and Cities programme, and more awards than I would list under time constraints for the natural environment team, who have some amazing individuals and teams within it who've done so many brilliant projects. And I wanted to mention what that looks like on the ground, because it's easy to talk about these kind of things in the abstract. So that means essential relationships with community groups, with friends groups, particularly with organisations like Plymouth Tree People and Food Plymouth, who we work very closely with on delivery, but wider partnerships too, that have amazing people on the ground, like the Green Communities team, Plymouth Natural Grid, which wouldn't be possible without our partners like the National Trust and Zebra Collective, Real Ideas. So much of that work is done in collaboration. Some stats: over 50,000 trees across Plymouth over the last few years through the Plymouth and South Devon Community Forest. You know, that really is amazing in an urban environment. But also one of the bits that I find most exciting, community orchards, over 20 new community orchards in the last few years, which isn't just about having more trees on your doorstep, but the opportunities for free, healthy food for communities to benefit with, and the opportunities particularly for young people to get excited about seeing where food actually comes from, you know, rather than it just all being in plastic packaging from a supermarket. I've talked at length about the Plymouth Plan for Nature and People, and you know, this is another opportunity for people to look at the commitments in that around trees. But one thing in particular I wanted to mention, which will very much change what you see on the ground, is around tree equity. So essentially this principle that trees aren't spread evenly around Plymouth. There are some neighbourhoods that have over a third canopy cover. There are others, particularly in the southwest of the city, including in areas with high social deprivation, where the canopy cover is around a handful of percent. And I started this introduction with all the benefits of street trees, and at the moment, some of those communities aren't benefiting in the same way from that. So what the Plymouth Plan for Nature and People aims to do is to help balance that tree equity and to prioritise those neighbourhoods that are most in need. I've covered some of the positives there, but to return to the negatives again, there are some real challenges with this, and I don't want to wash over those. In a large organisation of over 2,000 employees, we've been working hard to spread those environmental values across all schemes. You'll hear me talk a lot about what the natural infrastructure teams do, but it's equally important to make sure those values are at the heart of all teams, from planning, strategic transport, house building, and making sure this is done well in that. And what the Tree Management Principles document that we're discussing here today offers us a way of making sure that we do things better, whether that's transparency, whether that's about safety of our staff, whether that's how we engage and consult. And there's always ways of doing that better, as well as, of course, the sustainability that I've been talking about in different veins today. It will continue to be rooted in the feedback from expert tree officers. This is a very technical document that needs to be applied in a context which is legally significant, but also environmental groups. The Plan for Trees steering group, which has very, very knowledgeable and passionate representatives from community organisations who will be informing this document, and of course on councillors. The background of this document, which Chris will touch upon in a moment, has been informed by opportunities from opposition councillors through planning, and that's definitely shaped our thinking about how we continue to do this better. So I'll pass over to Chris, who's going to cover a few slides that just goes into a bit of the detail on the wider tree management principles.
Cool, thank you, Tom. Yeah, just a few brief slides just to kind of go through kind of what the document sort of does and a bit of background to it. Tom's talked really at length, well there around the benefits and the challenges that trees bring to the city. Some of the numbers, what that means in terms of the council's responsibility. There's approximately 70,000 trees in the city which we have a responsibility for managing and maintaining as our own tree stock. We've also got responsibilities around overseeing a tree protection order and statutory duties around kind of planning and other ends, which all integrate in have an interrelationship with trees. Tom talked about the benefits of trees. They're massive. I won't go into that in detail now, but the report sets that out. I think it's really important to recognise the importance of trees of the identity of the city. We are a green city, and we need to kind of recognise that. And this document, looks to do that, looks to set that out in terms of the benefits that the trees bring to the city. It's a pre-existing document. This document was published in 2019 when the Plan for Trees was launched, and what this process over the last 12 months has been about reviewing that and updating it in line with new legislation, just in the new context, new standards which we need to kind of work towards. So the purpose, it's broken down into a series of chapters which cover all of them. We've expanded the scope of the document from where we were in 2019. So it now not only picks up on how we manage and maintain our own trees, but also, as I said, the duties around tree protection orders. It also talks about how we kind of deal with trees in the planning process. So there's something really clear. We want to be really transparent about and accountable in terms of how we're setting out kind of management of trees across the board. And we also talk about how we're looking towards planting more trees in the city to bring that forward. A lot of that in each of those chapters talks about engagement and consultation relevant in each of those areas. Obviously, one of the defining elements is around safety as well. So how this document is pretty clear, and then that it's often the conversation we're having with residents, with councillors, with stakeholders in the city around what do we need to do to keep both our community safe, our streets safe, but also have the benefits of trees. So what have we done since, in terms of the review of the document? As I said, 2019 was the last published date of this document. So since that point in time, we've had a new Environment Act, which has brought new duties for the local authority in terms of how we consult around removing street trees. We've also had our own kind of local challenges in terms of which have been obviously identified through the Mile Away Learning Review in terms of being able to do a better job around communicating with the public, engaging with the public, consulting with the public. So we've had a working group internally. We've been working really hard on reviewing this document and bringing this forward as a new version. There's been an awful lot of work that's been put into that. We've also had some external reviews, so our Plan for Trees steering groups, using some of our kind of trusted external partners also, giving an external view on the document itself. Comments from today kind of will be picked up to kind of then integrated into and considered as part of that final version of the document, which we'll seek approval for. So, and that won't be the end. There's a commitment to reviewing this on a 5-yearly basis. Things change, the context change, the city will change, legislation may change. We need to keep that as a rolling process. Just some of the key changes, just to highlight them for you. We've expanded in terms of the definitions of how we manage our own trees. So chapter 3, I think it goes into the detail of how we manage our trees, the council trees. Obviously, we have kind of over sort of 1,500 inquiries from residents each year on average in terms of trees that are in their streets, in their communities. So we want to clearly explain so the public, as much as they can, understand the principles of how we manage our trees. So that's really clear. Gives officers the opportunity, the best opportunity to do the best job they possibly can. The document is now really clear on how we're going to consult, so that the duty to consult, which has come through the Environment Act, we've got in section 3 as well, and also in the appendix, are really kind of well thought through, taken from learning from other local authorities around how we're going to carry out that consultation process. We've got an expanded section around tree planting, so our commitments to improving trees, the treescape in the city. And also, how do we integrate that into the planning process? Again, something that wasn't in the previous document, being really clear around how that interrelationship works. Some of this, we haven't gone into the technical detail in the document. This is about setting the principles, but wanting to be able to give the public a view of how we do this work and how we work towards these overriding principles. As I said, in each section we've embedded an element around community engagement. We know that's so important to the success of bringing this forward. So, summary, this it provides a framework. This document is about a framework. It's not telling us in every kind of single scenario how we will deal with challenges or issues which crop up, but it gives us the framework for us to work with partners, to work with the public to make sure we're making sensible decisions around tree management. Across planning, as I said, across our own trees, and also, thinking about how do we kind of, grow trees in the city? How do we put right trees in the right place to benefit communities? Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, that's great, and we appreciate all the work you've put into the document for our reading before the meeting. Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask, the 2021 Environment Act brought in new powers, street trees in particular, and the environmental impact assessment linked to them. Can I ask, it's clarification really, do we have to publish those impact assessments? Did the public request them? And I'm just trying to remember what the final part of the question was. It's gone. No, that'll do to be going on with. If you could just help clarify that, please.
Yeah, sure. It's a really, really good question. So the legislation doesn't set out any particular way in which we need to carry out that assessment. It just states that the duty to consult for removal of street trees, and there's a range of exemptions when we wouldn't need to consult, but we need to put sign notices up. We need to kind of inform the public of the identified need to remove those trees and the reason for that. We also need to publish that on our website, as well as communicating with local residents. So they're the things that stipulate under the duty. In terms of what we've understood, though, in terms of how we do that well, that's where I think in Appendix 1, we've got kind of an options assessment report. So we've worked to think about actually what is it that the public will need to know and be able to understand our decision. So that's where we've built up kind of a range of questions during that in that template, which officers will use to then inform that, and we'll use that to then inform kind of our communications, which we'll put out, as I said, on site, and we'll publish on the website as well. So there's no prerequisites in the legislation about what that information needs to be.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I clarify on that as well? So you'll have different page numbering to me probably, but on page 28 of the main document, there's that flow chart, and the crucial thing about that is it makes it incredibly clear, the decision-making process around this kind of tree removal, because we start from the point of saying that we're very, very proud of all the trees that we have across our city, particularly our veteran trees, our TPO trees, our trees that have significant amenity value. But there will always be some times where trees need to be cut down for various reasons. It might be that tree is a public safety risk because of the disease it has. It might be that there's a road safety risk, which means that new transport infrastructure needs to be put in place. And what this flowchart does is it makes it very, very clear the different reasons why that might be necessary, but also who will be involved in that decision-making process and how we'll be transparent with communities. And I think that's what makes this a big step forward in terms of processes before.
Thank you, if I may, just to follow up briefly on that. I think following what happened a few years ago, everybody has become incredibly sensitive about every tree in the city, quite frankly. So it's reassuring and it's important that the council have policies in place that ensure the transparency of any decision making around any particular tree. So I thank you for that. If I could just briefly comment, Chair, there's a lovely map on page 76 showing canopy cover. Unfortunately, my ward doesn't seem to exist. It's not on there in the sense that it's not labelled. And we do have a canopy issue. So I'm grateful for some of the planting which is now happening to increase our canopy.
Yes, so St Peter and the Waterfront ward is in the bottom 5 for canopy covers of wards across the city, and so it certainly is a priority on the tree equity point. And I'm sorry, the labelling was inaccurate in terms of the ward names.
Brilliant. Councillor Macleay.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if there's a quick action on that one for the canopy cover stats of each ward to be given to the relevant members. I don't know if I'm just being a little bit colourblind today, but I could not tell which kind of shade of green related to which part of the ward.
So can I just respond to that? So what I would encourage you to do is look at a website. It's called like the Tree Equity UK map, and that is a national done by the Woodland Trust, is it? Where it's incredibly clear. And one of the brilliant things about it is you can zoom in and look at neighbourhood boundaries. You can also apply other mapping to it, so you can look at how it applies to health inequalities and socioeconomic data, and you know, it's very interesting and clear, some of those correlations here in Plymouth. So we can circulate the link to that if that'd be useful, but there's also 2 major reports that have been commissioned by the council in recent years, which go through that data in more depth as well. The tree economics one, and there's another one which I can't remember the name of, and if that's useful, we can circulate that to members too.
Glorious, thank you. Now looks like some deliciously geeky stats to be jumping into. So we're being asked to endorse this report, and obviously I am no tree expert. Very passionate about it, but it's not my background of expertise. I'm wondering which stakeholders we have already had feedback on this active version of the document, and what their comments on it were.
So the recent meeting of the Planetary Steering Group, which I would normally chair but wasn't able to because of a net zero event, it was a day of multiple clashes and I had to make some difficult decisions on, but the Planetary Steering Group discussed it at that meeting, I believe, and that is made up of various organisations that are kind of particularly local and regional. So it has representatives from Plymouth Tree People, from the Open Spaces Network, Dave Kerno. It also includes organisations that are landowners in Plymouth, like Arts and Our Social Housing Providers, PCH, as well as national representatives from Woodland Trust and others. So they had that opportunity there to feed in. Did you want to share some of the feedback they raised at that meeting?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it was discussed at the meeting, and since then they've had the documents as well. So they've been providing that information back to us. So broadly at the moment, some really positive responses from them. There's some technical elements which they kind of inevitably are picking up on in terms of, like, you know, wanting to see certain elements referenced in there. So there's some particular things. I think the main element is around where we plant trees. So it's kind of it's going into a lot of technical detail around where we do and don't do that. Obviously, this is a document of principles. We're not going to go into sort of defining it to the nearest centimetre where we're going to be achieving that in each street in the city, but the document's there to set the principles and the framework for us to work towards that. Still waiting on final comments to come back. I think the deadline was the same as today. So following that, we'll bring all those kind of different views together to provide the final version of the document is the intention.
Magic. So supplementary with that in mind, I think it's really important to recognise the good work this council has done, both in kind of the progress that's being made in actual getting plants in the ground and raising up new trees, but also that kind of positive focus on public engagement and consultation. I'm just wondering if you can share some extra detail on how you envisage this process working and how it will be rolled out. So there's a particular example that I want to draw on of a current planning permission that will include the felling of 4 mature trees as part of the King's Road plan. The 3-page kind of consultation states that we're really keen and transparent to give as much information as possible about the trees, their health and mitigation measures to offset their loss, and then it doesn't go on to give any of that information. Obviously, we have a bit of a troubled history, albeit under a different administration, with tree felling at this council. Obviously, we also know that mature environment trees simply can't be replaced. So how is the council actually implementing positive changes to public consultation and not just paying lip service to it?
So I'm very familiar with the case that you're talking about, partly because it's in my ward, but also because this case has been a bit of a pilot to start applying some of the values of this and to test it out and to get feedback on that. So as part of this particular example, again, we are proactive in sharing that with the Plan for Trees steering group, as well as starting to do the public consultation around that. They immediately raised certain questions about certain reports, which I believe we've since shared with them since they raised certain technical questions around it. It's a really interesting example because there have been multiple fatalities on King's Road in the last decade, 2 which were particularly prominent and hugely tragic. And the rectory community who live in the immediate area of that live in fear of road safety, and they feel incredibly strongly about the risk in that neighbourhood. And alongside that, there's been the development of Fulston Park, which is all about getting communities and young people involved in sport, and as part of getting people safely to that, they've been looking at sustainable transport provision and road safety in that area. And so the scheme seeks to install 2 pedestrian crossings and also some things to do kind of traffic calming to reduce the risk of fatalities on that very dangerous stretch, but also to make it easier for people to use sustainable transport to get to Fulston Park as a major venue. And as part of that process, they've identified that in order to make that as safe as possible, that tree felling will be needed to happen. So they've started off from a position of minimising that, which should always be the kind of first port of call, looking at all alternative options to minimise tree loss. They've also looked at mitigation, and so in the immediate area on the other side of King's Road, right there, very near to the pavement, there's going to be, and don't quote me on the number, but about 20 trees that will be planted within a stone's throw from that site so that the community still have trees there. There will be other mature trees retained on King's Road. And in terms of the 4 that are being consulted on for removal, off the top of my head, and again, I might be rusty on the details, but I believe 3 of those are Category C trees in terms of their assessment, which means that they would be unlikely to live longer than 20 years if they continued in situ as they have done. So they would be needing to be felled anyway because of risk down the line. But like with any of these cases, there will be strong opinions. There's certainly strong opinions from the nearby community. There will, of course, be opinions from environmental groups who want to retain as many trees as possible, as I very much do. And there's certainly learnings about, with this being an example of testing some of these processes, about what information can we make more readily available from the start so people have more to hand.
So thank you, Chair. Just to come back on that question, I want to clarify what you said, because you said to minimise tree loss as a starting point. I feel like no tree loss should be the starting point, and then it's a mitigation measure from there. Is it in the spirit of actual consultation if we envisage that nothing will change and this tree loss feels like an inevitability?
So I guess it's important to clarify what we mean by consultation, and we don't mean referendum. That, you know, you could approach it in that way, that you're looking solely at number of responses on either side, and you treat it like a Brexit referendum, for instance. The reason why it's not as straightforward as that in this and other instances is the council is required to weigh up all various different pressures that we have, and so one of those is environmental, and you know, I'm often the person in rooms and various cross-cutting projects, being that voice for the trees, being that voice for environmental-based engagement. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that the council is legally required and ethically required to also weigh up other factors too, which could be beyond the fact that there might be a lot of people who are against the tree cutting. And what you said about starting with the point of zero tree loss, there is a zero tree loss option on this, which is that you don't have that sustainable transport infrastructure and that you choose the life of those 4 trees that are nearing the end of their healthy life over the life of potential road users and pedestrians alongside that. That is an option, but I think in this case, that is one that would be very hard to justify based on the recent fatalities. So it's really not an easy decision, and it's not one that anyone takes lightly, but it's a balancing of those different priorities that we'll have to do that. Is it a foregone conclusion? No, but I do think there are really compelling factors as to why there may have to be tree felling on that particular case.
Okay, Josh.
Thanks, Chair. Very quick one for you. So I've previously waxed lyrical about your Plymouth Plan for Nature. I think it's brilliant, really good. I love the piece around tree equity. And you, I think actually most of you have spoken around sort of that piece around the identity in a green city. I guess from a resident's perspective, and we've heard around sort of getting street trees in more deprived communities. How long will it be until we start to see those trees going into those deprived communities so we can see the great positive impacts that we're all pretty confident they're going to make?
The simple answer is this month. So, over the last few weeks, we've had street trees planted into streets with low canopy cover. So a great example of that is Durnford Street, St Peter in the Waterfront Ward. It might not be on the map, but it was there in our planting programme. An iconic road on the way to Royal William Yard, a site we're all, I'm sure, very proud to have in our city, and that's putting street trees right there next to some social housing, I think, off the top of my head. So big thanks to Plymouth Tree people who've led on that through funding through the community forest, who've worked with a contractor to deliver that, but that's just one of many examples. Off the top of my head, Kat will know the numbers. There's about 45 schemes lined up for this winter season. We've mapped tree equity on all of those to look at which of those are in low or high canopy cover areas. Some of those are direct delivery of us doing ourselves. Others are done through PTP. There's some really exciting ones with Society as well, who are doing some great planting work in schools with microforests. And so, yeah, there will be a lot happening this winter. And so the impact is immediate. But in terms of your wider point around, how do we see and evaluate that benefit? So the joy of the Plymouth Plan for Nature and People is those commitments, just like with the NZAP, will have that wider governance piece. So there'll be a steering group, there will be regular meetings where we're tracking progress on all of those type of policies and commitments. Kat, anything more you wanted to add from a community forest perspective?
I need to say, really, that community forest money obviously comes from government, it's DEFRA funding. We're just about, obviously, comes the end of the spending review period, but just to give some good news, it looks very likely there will be a Nature Climate 2, very thoughtful naming, but that would mean that the community forest would then get another 4 years. And now we're up and running and we are better informed about the best way to do this. I think we'll see a much quicker trajectory of getting some more trees into those spaces over the next 4 years.
Supplementary, thank you for that. It's really good to hear. In the last item on the local plan, we had conversation around design code and government urging authorities and planning committees to, utilise stronger design codes. And one of the words that did come up during that conversation was nature. Do you think, the plan for nature and that combination is going to help us see more and more trees delivered in new build projects and redevelopment, I guess?
So yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think, sometimes in the discussions around strategic planning, you hear housing mentioned a huge amount in terms of press coverage or in terms of questions. But actually, what we as a department are continuing to do is to look at the opportunities for nature to give placemaking, greater importance, to make sure biodiversity is part of that, and ways of making sure that growth is positive growth for communities and nature. Kat, you're the planning nerd amongst us. Anything you wanted to add on that?
I think just to add that we've got very creative and innovative planning team here, and I think one of the best things going forward is, whether it's planning codes or everything, thinking about how nature can help us solve some of the challenges. Whether we've seen the flooding, we know that is going to increase. How do our tree pits help with that? How do we build that infrastructure in? And how does nature become part of the solution for the growth? So the growth is can continue, it can continue at pace, but it doesn't mean that we don't integrate nature into it and people have brilliant places to live. So I think with the local plan coming up for review, it's just another opportunity to tie that all together.
Last one from Charlotte, thank you.
Thank you. I may have missed this at the start when I had to pop out for a comfort break, but I was reflecting as we've been having this discussion that I think the original reason why this document has come to committee today came out of the September full council meeting, where there was a motion amended by my Labour colleague, Councillor Sudan. She got very strong support about how we sort of, the context was after the sort of Wilmot Gardens planning decision, and the sort of broader context of or debate of how we as a city, kind of healing the wounds of Armada Way, and how sort of flashpoints like Wilmot Gardens, where I think residents rightly felt very strongly and campaigned very well to get that planning decision overturned to protect the trees. That there was also this kind of parallel debate alongside the tree management principles document around whether there was essentially a sort of two-tiered approach to you get a TPO if you're not on council land, but if you are on council land, the tree isn't seen to be at such a threat, and that was kind of the background to some of this background, but obviously the sort of things that say Armada Way suggest that wasn't always the case, that trees on council property aren't at risk, etc., etc. So, with that background, can you provide a bit of an update on where we've got to with the sort of this process of providing reassurance to the public that how TPOs will be issued when they're on public or council-owned land? I see it's sort of touched on in passing in the document, but can we just put a bit more light on that aspect, given that was such a strong driver of why this document's here today? Thank you.
So the Tree Management Principles document is a pre-existing document that's been refreshed, but you're completely right that the reason it's here today is because of that motion, and very much welcome that opportunity to discuss that topic. So I think it's important to be really clear of what a tree protection order is. So it does not block all tree felling, and it's a way of giving extra protection for trees of particular amenity value that are at risk of felling, to make sure there's a mechanism in place so that the landowner is required to contact the council and for there to be a process and a dialogue around that. And I think that sometimes gets missed. With Wilmot Gardens, it sparked the debate around TPOing trees on council land. And the reason why there's a tricky balance around this is that PCC would end up being the kind of judge, jury and executioner, in terms of we'd be TPOing our own trees, and then our own staff would be reviewing their decision that they themselves made, and there was a lot of debate around how that's best applied and looking at a practice elsewhere. So the Wilmot Gardens case has been considered as part of this, and it's also been applied to other cases to look at how we can do that better. And so Pounds House is a relevant example of that, an example of council property, but which is going into private hands, and with a very strong awareness of some hugely significant trees that are there on that land, beautiful trees, historic trees, trees that are incredibly rich with biodiversity. And so the approach that we've taken there, and which is very clear in this document, is that if a piece of land is going into private hands, having previously been owned by the council, that a process will take place on every single one of those kind of transactions whereby the trees on that land are reviewed. They're evaluated in terms of whether those trees meet the criteria, and in this case, in Pounds House, there are quite a few trees that have met those criteria where TPOs have been applied, so that there is consistency on those cases. But what I do want to be clear about is that we started talking about the numbers of trees in the city, about 400,000 across the city. I can't remember the exact number, but about 60,000 that are the responsibility and ownership of PCC. We can't have a situation where PCC TPOs every single tree that it's responsible for. The number of staff that would be involved in that would be astronomical. I'm sure it would dwarf the size of the grass cutting team, the waste team put together, working exclusively on that. The number of trees we're talking about is vast, and so this is about prioritising the trees that are of highest value to communities and to nature, and making sure that there are transparent decision making that we can apply in all of those cases. And I think the detail in this is reassuring to make sure that will be clearer going ahead. And I think either of you two wanted to add on TPOs.
Just one small point, I think, to your point, around, I think, the objectivity of that process. I think so. The one thing we have strengthened in this document, so it's taken information which is already published, we brought into this document recognition of there is a methodology which is used nationally, so there is an objectivity to an assessment of any tree put forward for a TPO, whether it's on council land or private or any landowner perspective. So there will be consistency in terms of that process.
Thank you. That's really helpful addition. I mean, I think as they sort of say, isn't it? You know, trust is very hard won and so quickly lost. And I must say that, you know, to have you guys coming back here presenting this way, having that level of detail at your fingertips, you know, telling us this kind of list of awards that we've won and all the way. I mean, it's just absolutely tremendous. And after Armada Way and everything around that, I mean, my God, are you as a team kind of working incredibly hard to rebuild our trust and reputation? And I think it's absolutely outstanding the way you're approaching us today and getting that build-in, brilliant. And I think, Chris, your point that, you know, you really touched on it. I mean, I think the reason why the Wilmot Gardens example felt like such a flashpoint, or at least, you'd see that from press coverage, and certainly that strength of feeling, is because people couldn't understand the process. They couldn't see why we, as an authority, were making the decisions we were, whose interests were we acting in, what guidelines were we following, even though we may have had some of that, it wasn't at the surface. So I think this is an incredibly valuable exercise in doing that, these little steps that we can do to rebuild trust and ever. But, you know, hats off to the team. I think you're doing a standing job, so thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Fantastic documents. Thank you for your passion and commitment and what you brought to us today. As a committee, we have to, or not have to, are we happy to endorse the updated Tree Management Principles 2025 document? Is that consensus? No one against? Everyone's happy. Brilliant. Thank you for your time. Good. Have a good evening. Thank you. We now go on to the work programme. We've got a lot of, if some of you have seen, you will see that there's quite a few items there with one meeting left. So I'm proposing that we just do it justice. Make sure that at the end of this cycle, we know that we've done everything we can. So if we can have an extra meeting, that would be great. And Glenn will explain why that's happening. Because there's also an item there that needs to be discussed, Chelson Meadow Solar Farm. We want to do that before it goes to Cabinet.
Thank you, Chair. So, Hannah, feel free to tell me I've got this wrong. So, as the Chair said, we've got a number of items that we haven't managed to schedule yet, just because how busy we've been and how many things we've looked at. So, it'd be really helpful to have an additional meeting. In conversation with the Chair and Vice Chair earlier, we talked about Chelson Meadow Solar Farm, which has been on your work programme for quite a while. We are anticipating bidding for government funding for that scheme. We're hoping that programme that we're bidding for will open before Christmas, and we'll get an answer by the end of January.
If that's successful, we will be moving forward quite quickly, potentially, subject to approval of the business case and your views. And so a date at the end of January would be really helpful to make sure we do that justice and in a timely way if we do proceed on its way through the process.
Yeah. So just to pick up from what Glenn said, we've looked at the diary. Obviously, you know, there's a lot going on in January with budget scrutiny and such. So in order to be able to have the right people here, get Chelsea Meadow through before the cabinet agenda goes out, the meeting would need to be on the Thursday, the 29th of January. And what we're proposing is that we also we split the 6 items that are currently proposed for February into 3 and 3, so that even if the Chelsea isn't able to come to that meeting, there's still a reason to meet. So split it and have 2 meetings with 3 items each. So it'd be the 29th of January and then the 4th of February.
Am I okay with that?
Can I give apologies for the 29th? It's the Coastal Futures Conference, so I definitely can't attend that. Thank you.
We recognise it's busy and there will be these situations, but if you can get a sub, hopefully that will mitigate that. But yeah, we just got to do it justice. We are led by events. Sometimes things happen, as Glenn said on that particular item. It sounds like a very big, significant piece of work that is going to go to cabinet potentially, and we need to scrutinise it before. There will be, not everyone will be able to make it, so it'll be one of them. It's like a birthday party. I'm missing my Christmas party, you know, because you go away sometimes. But we've got to carry on the business, okay? Okay. Yeah.
On the work programme, the other one that's really important is the Plymouth Waterfront Partnership meeting, because they have an electoral cycle, and if they don't get in February, they're in some difficulty.
Through you, Chair, that's one of the other items that we're proposing for that 29th of January meeting.
Really good point, Alison, thank you. Action log, Hannah?
A couple of the actions are updated. I'm actively chasing any of the others that aren't. And if anybody wants any updates on any specific ones, I can do that. But
Brilliant, thank you. Been a really good session. Really important stuff. Thank you for all your contributions. Thank you. Thank you.